Hello, my dear friends. Victorian respectability was a mask, and behind it was a world you were never meant to see. In these polished homes, candy could hide lethal powders, children's medicine could carry narcotics, and fashionable gatherings sometimes involved inhaling chemicals for fun. The danger was woven into daily life so seamlessly that no one questioned it. Tonight, you'll step inside and feel just how close the edge really was. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soothing background, and let's embark on this journey together tonight. If you thought that buying strong medicine in the Victorian era required a doctor's approval or a careful examination, you would be mistaken. In many towns, the pharmacy was less a guarded medical office and more a shop with shelves open to anyone who had a few coins. The door was easy to push open, the counter was wide and uncluttered, and behind it stood rows of glass bottles filled with liquids of every colour. Some of them contained alcohol mixed with opium. Others held powders that could keep a person awake for days. None of them required you to prove you needed them. You only had to point to the bottle or name the remedy you wanted. The labels were printed in decorative fonts, sometimes in Latin, sometimes in English. They often made vague promises about restoring strength or clearing the mind. Ingredients were listed, but not in ways that most people could understand. Words like tincture, elixir, and cordial sounded safe enough, and that was often enough to make a sale. The recipes were described as secret or time-tested, but the reality was that many were mixtures created in the back room by the shopkeeper. It was common to see children sent to the pharmacy to pick up medicine for their parents. They would return home carrying bottles that today would require locked storage and a prescription. The shopkeeper rarely asked questions. Regular customers were remembered by name and greeted warmly. New customers were given polite service, often with a suggestion to try something extra. It is strange how easy it was to buy something that could stop a cough or stop a heartbeat, and no one seemed worried. Inside, the air smelled faintly of alcohol and herbs. The glass counter displayed boxes of pills, small tins of powders, and a selection of lozenges. Some products promised relief from nervousness, others from indigestion, and many claimed to cure nearly everything. Behind the counter, tall shelves held the stronger mixtures, but they were never truly out of reach. The pharmacy was a place where need and curiosity met without barriers. Some of the more expensive bottles came with embossed labels and cork stoppers sealed with wax. They looked almost like gifts rather than medication. People often kept them on display at home, on the same shelf as fine liquor. There was no stigma in owning these remedies. In fact, it was a sign that you cared for your health and had the means to do so. The business thrived because there was a steady flow of customers. Workers came in after long shifts to buy something to calm their nerves or help them sleep. Mothers came to buy soothing syrups for restless children. Elderly men came for tonics that claimed to improve strength and ease aches. If modern pharmacies operated this way, the line at the counter might look more like a queue for a bar than a medical facility. It was not unusual for someone to buy several kinds of medicine at once, a bottle for pain, a powder for digestion, and perhaps a tonic for energy. There was no sense that these might interact badly. The advice from the shopkeeper was usually to try them and see what worked. Word of mouth was the main source of recommendations. If a neighbour said a certain mixture helped them feel better, others would buy it without hesitation. Pharmacies competed for attention with bold advertisements in newspapers and posters in busy streets. They used images of strong, smiling men and healthy, graceful women. The text promised fast results and long-lasting benefits. There was rarely any mention of side effects. The lack of regulation meant that a company could make almost any claim it wanted. For many people, the pharmacy was one of the most important places in town. It was where you went when you felt unwell, but also where you went to improve your mood or give yourself extra energy. I think the most surprising part is how normal it all seemed to them, even though we would see it as reckless today. There was no separation between medicine for serious illness and substances taken simply to feel different. The result was a culture where self-medication was constant. People adjusted their own doses according to how they felt, a few drops more for a worse day, a little less when they felt fine. Some became dependent without even realizing it. The line between relief and habit was thin, and it was easy to cross without noticing. In the evenings, the pharmacy might still be open, lit by oil lamps that cast a soft glow over the bottles. Late customers came in quietly, bought what they needed, and left. The street outside might be dark, but inside the glass jars reflected the light, making the place look warm and safe. The truth was less comforting. Those jars held more than just remedies. They held the potential for harm as much as for healing. Behind the counter, the shopkeeper kept his records. They were not medical charts, just lists of who bought what and when. There was no law to keep these private. It was a way to remember who might be coming back soon and what they might want next time. Regular customers were valued, not because their health was improving, but because their purchases were steady. Some pharmacists were more careful than others, warning customers to be moderate, but many simply sold what was asked for. Business depended on trust, and trust was built by giving people what they wanted. In a world without strict oversight, the balance of power was tilted toward the seller. The buyer could only rely on their judgment, and that judgment was often influenced by habit and hope. When I think about how easily dangerous substances were sold at that time, it makes the modern rules seem far more reasonable. Today, certain medicines are locked behind counters or require signatures, but in the Victorian era, they were out in the open, waiting for anyone to take them home. The pharmacy was as much a social space as a medical one. As the years went by, this open-door approach shaped the way people saw medicine. It was not just a treatment for sickness, but part of everyday life. A bottle in the cupboard was as common as bread on the table. The idea that you could walk in, choose something strong, and leave without question became part of the rhythm of living. And so, in those streets where the lamps burned low and the air was thick with coal smoke, the pharmacy stood as a place of comfort and risk. It was where people found what they thought they needed, even when it was more than they should have taken. The door was always open, and the shelves were always full. The next time we step inside, we will see what happens when those shelves start to offer more than just medicine. If the pharmacy doors closed at night, the habit of what people bought there often opened the next day. For many in Victorian towns, the morning routine did not begin with food or even water. It began with a small bottle on the kitchen shelf. Inside was laudanum, a mixture of opium and alcohol, dark in colour and stronger than anything served at a table. The bottle was often left in plain sight, sometimes next to the tea tin or the sugar jar. A few drops into a cup were enough to start the day. In homes where the air was damp and heavy from the night, the first sip brought a kind of relief. The bitterness of the liquid mixed with tea was sharp, but quickly followed by a spreading warmth. It loosened the grip of morning aches, softened the edges of worry, and made the grey streets outside feel less oppressive. It is difficult not to notice that in some houses, laudanum was as common as bread, and perhaps more valued. The habit was easy to maintain because it fit so neatly into the rhythm of daily life. For people who worked long hours in factories or workshops, the early dose made the thought of the day ahead bearable. It dulled the discomfort of stiff joints and cleared the restlessness left over from the night. A second sip was not unusual if the first did not seem enough. The effect was mild at first, but even a mild calm was a welcome change from the usual noise and fatigue. In wealthier homes, laudanum was part of a more elaborate breakfast ritual. A maid might bring a tray with tea, a small dish of bread, and the familiar bottle. The same quantity was poured each day, measured by habit rather than by any real calculation. Guests were not shocked to see it. In many circles, it was considered a sign of refined living to start the day with something more than plain tea. The taste was not pleasant, but it was familiar, Over time, it became associated with the start of a new day, like the sound of the morning bell or the opening of shop shutters. The bitterness was a signal that things were beginning. People did not question whether it was wise to begin each day with a strong narcotic. The comfort it brought seemed proof enough. Some households kept multiple bottles, one in the kitchen and another in a bedroom. This ensured that even on cold mornings when getting out of bed was slow, the first sip could be taken before rising. If coffee shops had existed on every Victorian street, they might have been outnumbered by the number of rooms with laudanum within arm's reach. The convenience of having it nearby made it less like medicine and more like a morning necessity. Outside the home, those who left early for work often carried a small vial in a coat pocket. A dose could be taken discreetly while walking or upon arriving at the workplace. There was no shame in it. The practice was so common that seeing someone add drops to a drink did not draw attention. It was simply part of how the city moved through the hours. Not everyone took it for pain or illness. For some, it was simply to improve mood. A dull day became easier to endure, and small annoyances seemed less important. The early morning chill, the uneven streets, the heavy smell from the river, all felt more distant after the dose. I think the quiet acceptance of this habit says as much about the pace of life then as it does about the medicine itself. Pharmacies encouraged the practice by making laudanum available in different bottle sizes. Large bottles for the home, small ones for travel. Some even offered special blends with added flavouring to mask the bitterness. Advertising rarely warned about overuse. Instead, it spoke of relief, energy, and better mornings. Within families, the habit sometimes passed from one generation to the next. Children saw their parents taking it and grew up believing it was part of adult life. By the time they reached working age, the taste was not strange, and the effect was something they recognized. This quiet transfer of habit kept the demand steady, and the pharmacy counters busy. In the colder months, morning use often increased. The warmth it provided was a comfort against the damp air. A little extra was taken on days when the body felt slow to start, and soon the larger dose became the usual one. There was rarely a moment of decision to stop. The routine simply continued, unchallenged, until it was part of a person's identity. For those living alone, laudanum became more than a morning habit. It was a companion of sorts, a reliable presence that marked the start of the day. A sip in silence could be the only calm moment before the demands of work or the bustle of the streets. It required no conversation, no arrangement, only the steady hand of habit. Looking back, the danger was not in one morning's dose, but in the way each day's measure joined with the next. Weeks and months blurred together, and the body adjusted to expect the early drop. Skipping it could make a person irritable, sluggish, or unwell. But taking it kept them steady enough to go on. As the city woke around them, those who had already taken their laudanum moved through the streets with a certain calm. They blended into the crowd, indistinguishable from anyone else, except for the quiet glow in their eyes and the small bottles hidden in their homes. The habit was private, but far from rare. By the time the morning work began, the effects were fully in place. The day ahead seemed possible, no matter the weather, the noise, or the weight of labour waiting. The pharmacy had done its part the day before, and the bottle would be there again tomorrow. And so the mornings rolled forward, each one marked by the same small act, repeated without question. In the next part, we will follow these bottles beyond the breakfast table, into the long hours of labour and the midday markets where laudanum met the wider world. The habit of starting the day with laudanum often carried into other parts of life, especially mealtimes. In many homes, the strong taste of medicine was not always taken directly from a spoon or a cup. It was mixed into whatever was already on the table. Tea was the most common choice. A few drops would disappear into the steam, changing the drink in a way that only the drinker understood. The bitterness softened when paired with sugar, making it easier to take without a grimace. Soup was another favoured medium, in a city where the midday meal was often little more than a thin broth with bread. Adding medicine to the bowl was practical. It spared the effort of remembering a separate dose later. The warmth of the soup carried the taste well enough, and no one asked why the flavour seemed slightly different from the day before. In households where the habit was shared, it became a silent agreement. The meal was both nourishment and treatment. Sweet foods offered an even more discreet way to consume these substances. Biscuits, candies, and small cakes could hide more than just their fillings. Pharmacists and home cooks alike knew that sugar masked bitterness effectively. Some shops even sold pre-flavoured mixtures intended for blending into desserts. Children, without knowing, sometimes ate them as part of the family table. It is unsettling to think how easily a child could be dosed under the pretense of giving them a treat. In public gatherings, these practices were less obvious but still present. A hostess might serve punch or tea laced with a small amount of tonic, claiming it made the drink more refreshing. Guests would sip without suspicion. The idea of refusing such hospitality was rare. People trusted that whatever was served was meant for comfort, not harm. The approach was convenient. There was no need to stop the day for medicine when it could be folded into a normal activity. Those who disliked the taste of certain remedies found this the easiest way to take them. The routine was gentle in appearance, even pleasant, but its effects were no less powerful than a direct dose. In markets, vendors sometimes sold candies and lozenges openly advertised as health aids. These were not entirely without merit for minor ailments, but their contents could be far stronger than modern regulations would allow. A person could buy a bag of sweets that carried enough narcotic to numb pain for hours. If such things were on store shelves today, they would likely be placed behind locked glass and sold with warnings. Yet in that time, they were bought as casually as fruit or bread. For those already accustomed to daily use, adding medicine to food meant less thought about timing. A small amount here, another there, and by the end of the day, they had consumed more than they realized. This quiet accumulation was part of why dependency crept in so easily. It was not always a matter of willpower. Sometimes it was simply the sum of small decisions repeated often. Families with limited resources found creative ways to stretch their supplies. A stronger batch might be diluted and divided among several meals. It made the bottle last longer, even if the effect was weaker. This thrift was practical but kept the habit alive, ensuring the next bottle would be purchased soon enough. In wealthier households, the presentation mattered as much as the contents. Silver spoons, porcelain cups, and fine trays accompanied the dosing. The appearance was one of refinement, not addiction. Guests could be served a sweetened tea with laudanum as part of a polite afternoon visit. No one called it medicine in such settings. It was simply part of the service. The difference between casual use and deliberate dosing blurred over time. What began as an occasional way to ease discomfort became a permanent feature of the dining table. People forgot there had been a time when these additions were not present. The taste became part of the expected flavour, especially in drinks. Children grew up knowing no other version of certain dishes. Pharmacies contributed to this blending of medicine and food by selling syrups in flavours like cherry, mint, and vanilla. The packaging emphasised taste almost as much as effectiveness. Some even suggested recipes for incorporating the medicine into puddings or drinks. The line between treatment and indulgence became faint. I think this merging of food and medicine says a great deal about how normalised drug use has become in daily life. Out on the streets, small stalls sometimes offered confections that claimed to soothe throats or settle the stomach. These were easy to buy and easier to eat, often without thinking about what they contained. A worker might carry a handful in a pocket, taking one during a long day. By evening, the packet was empty, and the dose far higher than intended. Even in hospitals, where the setting was more controlled, flavoured preparations were used to encourage patients to take their treatments. This habit, learned there, followed them home. Once a person knew that a bitter liquid could be made pleasant with sugar or mixed into food, the barrier to regular use dropped further. Over time, recipes were passed down within families, not as medical instructions but as part of household cooking. a certain tea blend for winter, a sweet syrup for sleepless nights, a special cake for aches. These traditions kept the link between medicine and daily meals alive, long after their original purpose was forgotten. By the close of the century, the habit was so embedded that removing it would have required more than warnings. It would have required changing the way people thought about food, comfort, and health. And in a world where so much was uncertain, people clung to what they knew, even if it carried hidden risks. The table remained a place where nourishment and narcotics met without conflict. A cup, a bowl, or a plate could carry more than just food. In the next part, we will move beyond the dining table and into the workplaces and markets where these substances followed people through the rest of their day. After the meals were cleared and the day's work was done, the focus in many Victorian homes shifted to rest. Sleep was not always easy to find in crowded neighbourhoods, where walls were thin and streets stayed busy long after dark. In these conditions, a quiet night for the whole household was a valuable thing. Chloral hydrate, a sedative available without difficulty, became one of the simplest ways to achieve it. The small glass bottle sat in many kitchens or on bedside tables. Its presence did not carry any sense of alarm. A measured amount was mixed into water, tea, or milk before bed. The taste was faint and easily covered with a bit of sugar. Once taken, it worked quickly, calming restless minds and heavy limbs until sleep came. It is remarkable how something so strong could be treated as casually as a cup of warm milk. Children who struggled to settle at night were often given smaller doses. This spared parents the repeated trips to check on them or soothe their complaints. In homes where work began early and ended late, having children sleep through the night meant fewer disruptions. Adults took it as well, especially those who found their thoughts racing or their bodies sore from labour. The effect was reliable. Within minutes, a stillness spread through the house. The sounds from outside became less important, and the clatter of daily life inside faded away. For many families, this was the first true quiet they experienced all day. It became easy to see why the habit formed quickly. The affordability of chloral hydrate made it even more common. It could be purchased in larger bottles for regular use, or in smaller amounts for those who use it occasionally. Pharmacists sold it alongside other popular remedies, often recommending it for sleeplessness, without any concern for how often it might be taken. There was no clear advice on how long it should be used, only reassurance that it worked. Some households built it into their nightly routine. After dinner, the bottle would be placed on the table next to the tea or dessert. Everyone who wanted some took it without question. The association between the evening meal and the evening dose became strong, and skipping it felt unusual. If modern households adopted such a routine, the kitchen counter would look more like a dispensary than a place for family gatherings. Parents valued the predictability it brought. A calm night meant they could rest without interruption, making the following day easier to face. This was especially important in homes with limited space, where several people shared a room. One restless person could disturb the entire group. Chloral hydrate removed that problem neatly. There were, of course, risks. Regular use led to dependence, though the word was rarely used. People spoke of it as a helpful habit rather than a dangerous one. If someone could not sleep without it, that was seen as proof of its effectiveness rather than a warning sign. I think this way of thinking shows how much trust was placed in remedies simply because they delivered results. In wealthier homes, chloral hydrate was served in more refined ways. A small glass of cordial or a sweetened cup of tea disguised its presence entirely. Guests might be offered a drink before bed and wake the next day unaware of what had helped them sleep so soundly. Among close friends and family, this was seen as a kindness rather than something to question. Even in hospitals and care facilities, chloral hydrate was a standard choice for patients who struggled to rest. The pattern was the same: a measured serving, a quiet room, and the expectation of an undisturbed night. Many patients took the habit home with them after discharge, finding it too useful to leave behind. The easy availability of the drug also meant that it could be kept on hand for more than just bedtime use. Some reached for it during the day if anxiety or agitation became too much. The calming effect, though intended for sleep, made stressful situations easier to endure. In this way, it crossed from being a nighttime aid to a general solution for discomfort. Over time, the line between need and habit blurred. People forgot the first night they used it, or the reason they began. The routine became self-sustaining. Bottles were replaced before they were empty to avoid a night without it. In some cases, families stocked more than one, ensuring it was always available in different parts of the home. Children raised in such households grew up believing that medicine for sleep was normal. They learned to associate certain tastes and smells with bedtime. This familiarity meant that when they became adults, they were more likely to continue the practice. The habit passed quietly from one generation to the next, rarely questioned and rarely discussed. For those living in noisy districts, the drug was more than convenient. It was a way to block out the chaos beyond their walls. The shouting from the streets, the rumble of carriages, and the sound of neighbours arguing could all be dulled into nothing. The silence it created was not natural, but it was welcome. By the end of the century, chloral hydrate had become one of the most trusted remedies in the home. Its role was simple: ensure that everyone slept. Few stopped to wonder what it might be doing to their bodies beyond that. The priority was rest, and it delivered. Night after night, the same ritual played out. Bottles were opened, liquids poured, and the house grew still. It was a picture of peace, but one built on dependence. In the next part, we will leave the quiet of the bedrooms and look at how some sought a different kind of escape in the lively streets beyond their doors. The search for quiet in Victorian homes did not end with adults. Children, especially infants and toddlers, were often at the centre of household noise and restlessness. In a time when medical advice was loose and advertising bold, products like Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup became staples in many homes. The label promised relief for teething pains, coughs, and general fussiness. It was sold as gentle and safe, qualities that made it easy for parents to trust. The syrup was sweet, with a pleasant flavour that encouraged children to swallow it without resistance. Beneath the sugar, however, it contained morphine in doses that could easily overpower a small body. For many parents, the most noticeable effect was the stillness that followed. A child who had been crying or squirming moments earlier would soon grow calm, their eyes heavy and their breathing slow. It is unsettling how this outcome was seen as a sign of success rather than a reason for concern. Mothers often kept a bottle within reach, ready for moments when nothing else seemed to work. In homes where other children needed attention or work demanded focus, having one less voice crying in the background was considered a blessing. The syrup offered a shortcut to peace, a way to manage more than just discomfort. The product was widely available, sold in pharmacies and general stores without any requirement for proof of need. Advertising campaigns praised it as a solution every parent should keep at hand. Testimonials in newspapers described grateful families whose children slept through the night after just one spoonful. The tone was confident, reassuring, and without warning. For many, the appeal lay not just in quieting a child, but in making their own lives easier. A day could be less stressful when a child is calm, allowing parents to handle chores, earn income, or simply rest. The syrup became part of the rhythm of care, used for both genuine illness and ordinary restlessness. If a modern product promised to stop a child from crying and keep them asleep for hours, it would likely face intense scrutiny before ever reaching a store shelf. In poorer districts, the syrup was sometimes shared among families, passed from one home to another when a baby's crying grew too much. In wealthier households, multiple bottles might be stocked to avoid running out. The practice cut across social lines because the desire for quiet was universal. Some parents gave it regularly at bedtime, whether or not the child was ill. Over time, this routine became so ingrained that skipping it seemed risky. Parents feared that without it, the night would be filled with noise and interruption. This dependency was not on the part of the child alone, but on the parents who had come to rely on the guaranteed calm. The dangers, while less discussed at the time, were always present. Morphine's ability to slow breathing meant that even a slight excess could become dangerous. Yet without clear instructions or standardized measurements, doses were often given by estimation. A spoonful could mean different amounts in different homes. In some cases, children became unusually drowsy during the day, and their energy dulled even when they were awake. This was not always recognized as a problem. Parents interpreted it as a sign of a well-behaved child. Neighbors complimented the quiet, unaware of the reason. I think the way silence was valued over vitality says much about the pressures of daily life then. Pharmacies continued to stock Mrs. Winslow's and similar syrups because demand remained steady. No official body monitored the safety of such products, and warnings, if they existed, were small and easy to overlook. The combination of sweet taste, low cost, and reliable effect kept it popular year after year. In larger cities, advertisements were painted directly onto the sides of buildings, making the product a familiar sight even to those who had never used it. The brand name became shorthand for calming a child, much like a household phrase. This visibility reinforced its reputation as trustworthy, especially in the absence of competing advice. Even when occasional reports surfaced about adverse effects, they were often dismissed or explained away. Families pointed to the many times the syrup had worked without harm. In their experience, the benefits outweighed any vague, distant risks. It would take many more years before the broader dangers of such regular morphine use in children were widely acknowledged. The habit passed between generations. Mothers taught their daughters how to prepare the spoon, how much to give, and when. These instructions were as much part of parenting advice as how to swaddle or feed an infant. Once learned, they were rarely questioned. By the close of the century, countless children had been raised with the aid of morphine-laced syrups. Some survived without obvious harm, others may have carried unseen effects into later life. At the time, there was little effort to connect long-term health issues with early exposure to such powerful substances. In the homes that used it, the result was predictable quieter nights, calmer days, and fewer disruptions. The bottle stood among other common household items, not locked away or treated with caution. Its role was simply to make life more manageable in a world where every day was a balance between work, care, and survival. And so, as the lamps dimmed and the streets outside grew quiet, the same quiet was replicated indoors. The syrup had done its work, and the night stretched ahead in stillness. In the next part, we will leave the nurseries and kitchens to see how the same craving for relief shaped the habits of those working in the city's busiest trades. From the quiet of the nursery, the story of Victorian drug use moves to a very different setting. The dentist's chair. Dentistry in that era was not a comfortable experience. Tools were basic, anesthesia was limited, and the sound of metal on enamel was often enough to make patients dread an appointment. When cocaine began to be used as a numbing agent for dental work, it was seen as a remarkable improvement. The numbness spread quickly through the gums, allowing extractions and fillings to be done with far less pain. For many, it was the first time they could sit through a procedure without gripping the arms of the chair until their knuckles were white. The use of cocaine in dentistry became popular with surprising speed. Bottles were prepared in concentrated form, applied directly to the gums with a small swab or brush. The effect was almost immediate, dulling sensation in the area so completely that patients often remarked on the absence of discomfort. In an age when pain was expected as part of medical treatment, this was nothing short of revolutionary. It is difficult not to notice how quickly something meant for the clinic found its way into daily life. After a visit to the dentist, patients are sometimes left with a small vial of cocaine solution. Officially, it was meant for aftercare, to be used if pain returned once the numbing wore off. In practice, many found other uses for it. The euphoria and alertness that accompanied the numbness were considered pleasant side effects. It did not take long for word to spread that this was more than just a dental aid. In social circles, particularly among the middle and upper classes, cocaine began to appear in unexpected places. Guests at small gatherings might be offered a taste in much the same way they would be offered a drink. It was not consumed in large amounts, but enough to produce a warm confidence and ease in conversation. People who might otherwise have been shy found themselves speaking more freely. If a modern dinner party served dental anaesthetic alongside the wine, it would likely make the evening memorable for all the wrong reasons. Pharmacies, seeing the growing interest, stocked small bottles for private purchase. While the labelling might still suggest medical use, the reality was understood. The boundaries between medicine and recreation blurred further with each sale. Those who had tried it at the dentist knew exactly what they were buying. In working-class neighbourhoods, access was less common due to cost, but not unheard of. A small amount could be shared among friends, especially during festive occasions. The stimulant effect made long nights feel shorter and conversations livelier. There was little discussion about the risks. The focus was on the immediate sense of energy and sociability it brought. Cocaine's portability made it easy to carry discreetly. Small vials fit easily into pockets or handbags. This meant it could be used almost anywhere without drawing attention. At theatres, concerts, or private clubs, it might be shared quietly between acquaintances. The sense of exclusivity added to its appeal. Some saw it as a mark of sophistication. Just as fine wines or imported cigars were signs of taste, so too was the possession of a refined stimulant. The fact that it had legitimate medical uses gave it a layer of respectability that other intoxicants did not enjoy. People could claim they were simply managing discomfort, even if the real goal was a different kind of relief. In some cases, dentists themselves encouraged this broader use. Repeat customers meant steady business, and providing a small supply for personal care ensured goodwill. Without strict oversight, there was little to stop such practices. What began as a professional courtesy became a quiet form of promotion. The physiological effects were not ignored entirely. Some users noticed restlessness, trouble sleeping, or a crash in mood after the stimulant wore off. Still, these drawbacks were accepted as minor compared to the benefits. In an era without the modern understanding of addiction, the risks were not fully recognized or discussed. I think the willingness to overlook these effects shows how strong the desire for quick improvement was, whether in health, mood, or confidence. Public spaces began to reflect this change in habits. It was not unusual to see someone dab a bit onto their gums before speaking at a meeting or engaging in a negotiation. The sharp clarity it provided could be an advantage in settings where persuasion and quick thinking mattered. For others, it was simply part of feeling prepared. As with many substances of the time, the lack of formal restrictions meant that usage patterns developed organically. Those who enjoyed the effects found reasons to incorporate them into more and more occasions. Celebrations, stressful days, or even routine social visits became opportunities. The line between special use and everyday use wore away over time. Cocaine-infused lozenges and other preparations appeared briefly on the market, catering to those who preferred a more discreet method. While not as potent as the liquid form, they still delivered enough of the drug to be felt. These products were marketed with the same confidence that characterized so many Victorian remedies, promising vitality and comfort without acknowledging the potential costs. The culture around its use was shaped as much by perception as by chemistry. Because it began as a dental aid, it carried none of the stigma that might have come with other drugs. It was a tool, a convenience, even a small luxury. In social gatherings, offering it was a way to show generosity and status. By the close of the century, cocaine had secured a place not only in medical kits, but in the small rituals of leisure and sociability. It was passed between friends, offered to guests, and kept on hand for moments when an extra edge seemed useful. The journey from dentist's chair to drawing room was surprisingly short, and few seemed to question whether that was wise. What began as a way to avoid pain during dental work had become another thread in the fabric of Victorian daily life. The same bottle that had been opened under the harsh light of a clinic could be opened again under the soft glow of an evening lamp, this time not for relief, but for enjoyment. In the next part, we will step out of the parlours and into the public spaces where substances like these moved more freely than the people who used them. From the drawing rooms and parlours where cocaine had found its place, the story of Victorian drug use shifts to the street and the home, where another kind of stimulant was making its rounds. Ether, along with other inhaled chemicals, offered a different sort of escape. Instead of numbing pain or sharpening focus, these vapours could lift a person's mood almost instantly. The process was simple, required no elaborate equipment, and could be done almost anywhere. That convenience made it appealing to people across the social spectrum. Small bottles of ether were sold in pharmacies, sometimes with vague instructions for medical use. Officially, it might be suggested for calming nerves, relieving minor discomfort, or even cleaning wounds. In practice, many people discovered that inhaling it directly brought a rush of lightness to the body and mind. The effect was quick, a sudden shift from whatever worries filled the day to a detached and buoyant state. It is remarkable how a liquid meant for cleaning could just as easily become a way to forget the day's problems. At home, some kept a bottle in the kitchen or a bedside cabinet. A small cloth could be soaked with a measure of ether, then held close enough to breathe in the fumes. Within seconds, the sharp chemical scent would give way to a strange calm. Muscles relaxed, thoughts drifted, and the weight of daily burden seemed to lift. For some, it was a momentary relief from fatigue. For others, it was a way to chase away boredom. On the streets, ether was not as hidden. In certain markets and public spaces, groups would gather in quiet corners to share it. The act was not always discreet. A handkerchief passed from one person to another could be recognized by those familiar with the habit. Vendors sometimes sold pre-soaked cloths, offering a quick hit for a small coin. The affordability and speed of the effect made it popular among workers looking for a break from long hours. Among the upper classes, ether sometimes appeared in more controlled settings. Private gatherings could include a small tray with bottles and cloths, offered alongside drinks. The atmosphere was less about escape from hardship and more about experimenting with sensation. Guests would recline in chairs, taking turns, and then drift into conversation or laughter with a softened edge. If modern social events replaced cocktails with bottles of solvent, the reaction would likely be less amused. The appeal was in its immediacy. Unlike other substances that needed to be ingested and take time to work, inhaled chemicals altered mood within moments. That speed meant they could be used in short breaks, between tasks, or even during them. The shift in feeling was noticeable, and for many, addictive in its way. But the quick onset also carried risks. Too much ether could lead to dizziness, confusion, or even unconsciousness. In crowded public spaces, this sometimes caused scenes that drew unwanted attention. People would sway, stumble, or speak in a way that revealed their altered state. In some cases, they simply lay down where they were, unable or unwilling to move. These incidents fed a reputation for odd and unpredictable behaviour among users. Pharmacies did little to curb this misuse. As long as customers paid, bottles were sold without question. The chemical was cheap to produce, and sales were steady. While some pharmacists may have cautioned against inhaling it, many said nothing, understanding that the demand was not driven by medical needs. I think the quiet acceptance of such sales shows how profit often outweighed caution in that era. In workplaces, especially those with repetitive tasks, ether became a shared secret. A few breaths could break the monotony, making the hours pass more quickly. Supervisors often looked the other way as long as the work was done. In some trades, it even became part of the culture, with new workers introduced to it by older ones. The portability of ether made it even harder to control. A small bottle could be hidden easily, and the act of using it could be disguised as simply smelling a scented cloth. This meant it could be brought into theatres, train compartments, or even churches without drawing too much notice. Over time, the habit shaped social behavior. People sought out companions who shared their interest in inhalants, creating informal networks. These groups sometimes overlapped with other circles of drug use, mixing substances in ways that increased the unpredictability of their effects. In some households, ether was kept for legitimate purposes but used recreationally when opportunity arose. A bottle intended for cleaning wounds might end up in the hands of someone looking for a different kind of relief. The thin line between medical supply and intoxicant blurred again, just as it had with so many Victorian remedies. Public health concerns did surface occasionally, usually after a highly visible incident. A person collapsing in the middle of a market or behaving erratically at a public event could spark temporary calls for restriction. But without strong regulation, these moments passed and the practice continued. The allure was not only in the sensation but in the shared experience. Passing a bottle or cloth among friends created a small bond, a moment of escape that was understood without words. In a time when life could be harsh and entertainment limited, such moments carried weight. By the end of the century, ether and other inhalants had become another thread in the fabric of everyday life for some Victorians. It was not as universal as laudanum or as fashionable as cocaine, but it held a steady place in the habits of those who valued quick and simple relief. The consequences, both physical and social, were accepted as part of the bargain, in the streets, in the home, and in the quiet corners of gatherings. The practice persisted. The tools were simple, the cost was low, and the effect was certain. In the next part, we will turn to a different kind of daily habit, one that blended health claims with indulgence in the form of colourful, sweetened medicines that promised to make life better with every sip. From the quick, sharp use of ether in streets and homes, the focus shifts to a slower, more deliberate ritual. Smoking opium in Victorian society was not only about the substance itself, but also about the process. In certain circles, it was framed as a refined activity, something that required preparation, special tools, and a patient hand. The setting was often private, away from the noise of the street, in a room arranged for comfort. A small oil lamp provided the steady heat needed. The flame was not large or bright, but constant, ensuring the right temperature to prepare the opium. The tools were part of the ritual: a long pipe, polished and carefully handled, and a small tray for holding the substance. Each movement was measured. The opium was shaped into a small pellet, placed at the end of the pipe, and held over the lamp until it softened. Then came the slow inhale, drawing the smoke deep before letting it out in a thin stream. It is almost strange to think how much care was taken to prepare something that could so easily take control of a life. The act was unhurried. Participants often reclined on low couches or cushions, settling into positions that allowed them to relax completely. The room might be dim, lit only by the lamp and perhaps a few candles. Curtains or screens added to the sense of enclosure. Once the first inhalation was complete, the body eased into a state that was both heavy and distant. The surrounding world faded into the background. For many, this was the appeal. The sensation was not abrupt like ether, nor purely stimulating like cocaine. Instead, it brought a slow detachment from the demands of the day. Muscles loosened, thoughts slowed, and conversation, if it happened at all, was quiet and sparse. In these moments, the pace of life seemed to change. Among the wealthy, opium smoking could be a social event. Guests were invited into specially arranged rooms, often with decorative screens, ornate lamps, and fine textiles. The equipment was kept clean and polished, adding to the impression that this was a cultivated pastime. Hosts might provide the opium and prepare it for their guests, ensuring the process was done correctly. If modern gatherings treated a dangerous drug with the same elegance as serving afternoon tea, the contradiction would be difficult to ignore. In less affluent settings, the ritual was simpler but still deliberate. The tools might be more worn, the surroundings more modest, but the pace and method were the same. Even in small rented rooms or shared lodgings, a space could be set aside for the practice. Pharmacies and certain suppliers ensured that those who wished to smoke opium had access to it. It could be purchased in various forms, some more concentrated than others. The legality and availability meant that, for those who could afford it, supply was rarely an issue. The social perception of opium smoking varied. For some, it was a sign of worldliness, a connection to distant cultures and exotic trade. For others, it carried an undercurrent of moral concern, especially when linked to neglect of responsibilities. Still, in private rooms across the city, the practice continued. The method itself encouraged repetition. Each preparation led naturally to another. The transition from one inhalation to the next was seamless, and hours could pass unnoticed. Those who partook regularly began to find the sessions a necessary part of their routine. Without them, the day felt incomplete. Some users claimed the practice helped with ailments, from sleeplessness to persistent pain. Whether or not the relief was real, the association between smoking and comfort grew stronger with each use. Over time, the body adjusted, requiring more to achieve the same effect. In some communities, opium smoking was a shared habit, with small groups meeting regularly. The same faces gathered, the same tools were used, and the same quiet filled the room once the process began. These gatherings could create a sense of belonging, even as they reinforced dependence. I think the calmness of these scenes hides the reality that such habits rarely stay within the limits people imagine. Outside the private rooms, the influence of opium could still be seen. Those who smoked regularly often moved more slowly, spoke less, and seemed detached from the events around them. Friends and family might notice changes in behaviour, but in an age where open discussion of addiction was rare, these signs were often left unspoken. The economic side of the habit was also significant. Maintaining the tools and supplies requires steady spending. For the wealthy, this was manageable. For others, it meant diverting money from other needs. Yet the priority was clear: the next session was worth more than many other comforts. By the later years of the century, the refined image of opium smoking had begun to shift. Reports of its dangers grew more frequent, but the quiet, controlled nature of the ritual allowed it to keep its place in certain social circles. The association with leisure and refinement made it harder for some to see it as a threat. In the rooms where the lamps burned and the smoke curled slowly upward, time seemed to stand still. The outside world, with all its noise and urgency, felt far away. The reality, however, was that the same patterns played out night after night, binding people to a habit that promised peace but asked for much in return. The gentle appearance of the ritual masked the weight it placed on the body and mind. In the next part, we will turn from the slow pace of these sessions to the bright displays and bold claims of the pharmacies, where substances were dressed in flavour and colour to appeal to every kind of customer. From the quiet haze of opium rooms, the Victorian appetite for chemical comfort took another form in the brightly lit windows of pharmacies and general stores. Here, the products were not hidden behind curtains or prepared in private. They were displayed openly, dressed in colourful packaging designed to attract the eye and suggest health, vigour, and modern sophistication. These were the patent medicines, sold as tonics, elixirs, and restorative drinks. Their appeal lay not only in their contents but in the image they projected. Boxes were printed with intricate patterns, gold lettering, and illustrations of robust men and graceful women. Bottles were labelled in bold type, promising improved energy, sharper minds, and longer life. The names were chosen carefully, evoking trust, tradition, or exotic origins. Customers browsing the shelves could not miss them. They stood out among the plain glass jars and paper-wrapped parcels. It is curious how much effort was put into making something dangerous look like a gift. Instructions were printed clearly, but they often encouraged frequent use. A dose before breakfast, another in the afternoon, and perhaps one more before bed. The suggestion was that regular consumption was the key to lasting results. This made the bottles empty quickly, and the customer returned for more. The cycle suited the seller well, ensuring steady sales without any guarantee that the promised effects were real. The claims were bold. Some tonics promised to cure fatigue, indigestion, and nervousness all at once. Others claimed to strengthen the heart, cleanse the blood, or improve the complexion. The language was confident and absolute, with no mention of side effects or risks. For many buyers, these products seemed like an easy solution to the common discomforts of daily life. Advertising played a central role in their success. Posters were pasted on walls and fences, advertisements ran in newspapers, and painted signs appeared on the sides of buildings. The messages were consistent. This tonic was the one you needed, and everyone should be taking it. Testimonials were printed alongside the ads, with named individuals praising the results. Whether these endorsements were genuine or invented mattered little to most readers. In shops, the products were placed at eye level or near the counter. The bright colours and ornate shapes of the bottles made them ideal for display. Some even came with small promotional items, such as spoons or measuring cups, as if to make the act of dosing more refined. If modern energy drinks were sold with the same lack of regulation, their labels might read like miniature novels. The pricing varied, but many were affordable enough to attract a wide range of customers. This was important because the appeal of these tonics was universal. The labourer who felt worn down by long hours, the housewife who struggled with constant chores, and the clerk who sat hunched over paperwork all saw a reason to try them. The products promised not just relief but improvement, a better version of oneself in a bottle. The actual ingredients were often a mix of alcohol, sugar, and small amounts of stimulants or narcotics. These gave an immediate sense of energy or calm, depending on the formulation. The effect might last only a short time, but it was enough to convince many that the tonic worked. The pleasant taste and warm sensation reinforced the habit. Over time, some users began to rely on these feelings to get through the day. Pharmacies stocked multiple brands, each competing for attention with even more elaborate packaging or louder claims. Some emphasized exotic sources, boasting of rare herbs from distant lands. Others leaned on supposed scientific breakthroughs, citing laboratory processes and expert endorsements. The competition drove both creativity and exaggeration. In wealthier households, keeping a variety of tonics was a mark of care and modernity. Guests might be offered a glass as a sign of hospitality. The presence of these bottles suggested that the host was attentive to health and up to date with the latest remedies. In poorer homes, a single bottle might be stretched over weeks, used sparingly when someone felt particularly run down. The lack of regulation meant that almost anything could be sold under the label of a tonic. This freedom encouraged experimentation among manufacturers. Some added colourings to make the liquid more appealing, while others adjusted the flavour to mask bitterness. A pleasant taste made it easier to recommend to friends, spreading the product through personal networks as effectively as any advertisement. Doctors sometimes expressed concern over these medicines, but their voices were drowned out by the volume of marketing. The public's trust was bolstered by the constant visibility of these products and the sense that everyone was using them. To question their safety was to question a widely accepted part of daily life. I think this shows how repetition and presentation can make almost anything seem normal. In some cases, the same company produced multiple products under different names, targeting various segments of the market. One tonic might be aimed at men, promising strength and endurance. Another might be aimed at women, promising beauty and calm nerves. A third might claim to be suitable for children, offering gentle benefits while containing many of the same active ingredients. Shops also hosted demonstrations, with sales representatives explaining the benefits and sometimes offering free samples. These events drew crowds, especially in towns where entertainment was scarce. People left with bottles in hand, ready to try the latest cure-all. Over time, the habit of taking tonics became routine for many. The bottles were kept in kitchens, bedrooms, or even workplaces, A dose could be taken at any time of day, often without much thought. This constant availability made it easy to rely on them for minor discomforts that might otherwise have passed on their own. By the end of the century, the culture around patent medicines and tonics was firmly established. They were as much a part of the visual landscape as shop signs and street lamps. Their promises were rarely questioned, and their risks were rarely discussed. For those who sold them, the combination of persuasive advertising and repeat customers was proof of success. The shelves of the pharmacy told the story clearly, rows of brightly coloured bottles, each claiming to be the answer to life's small and large problems. In the next part, we will look beyond the shop fronts to the kitchens and parlours where these bottles were opened, mixed, and consumed as part of the daily rhythm. From the bright shelves of tonics and bottled remedies, the Victorian fascination with self-improvement extended naturally into the realm of beauty. Here too, appearance was tied to social standing, and the lengths to which people would go to maintain it often ignored the cost to their health. Cosmetics were widely available, and many were made with ingredients that today would be considered dangerous. The knowledge of their risks was minimal, and even when suspicions arose, they were rarely strong enough to change habits. Lead-based face powders were among the most common. The pale complexion they produced was associated with refinement, signalling that one did not have to labour outdoors. The powder clung smoothly to the skin, covering blemishes and evening out the tone, yet its long-term use could cause skin damage, headaches, and more severe symptoms. The danger was invisible at first, making it easy for users to dismiss. It is remarkable how something that slowly poisons you could be marketed as a sign of good taste. Mercury-based creams promised to smooth the skin and remove imperfections. Applied regularly, they could lighten freckles and fade dark spots. These creams were often imported and sold at a higher price, giving them an air of exclusivity. The burning sensation they sometimes caused was explained away as proof that the product was working. The idea that such irritation could be harmful was not widely accepted. Belladonna drops were another strange addition to beauty routines. They were used to dilate the pupils, creating a look that was considered alluring. The effect was temporary but dangerous, with repeated use potentially harming vision. The appeal lay in the instant change to one's appearance, a visible transformation that did not require weeks of application. If modern beauty products required you to risk your eyesight, they would probably still find a market. The packaging of these products mirrored the elegance of the tonics from the previous part. Small glass jars and delicate bottles were decorated with ornate labels and sometimes wrapped in tissue paper. They were displayed in shop windows alongside perfumes and hair accessories, blurring the line between luxury and necessity. Buying them was as much about being seen as it was about the actual results. There were no ingredient lists or warnings on most of these items. The secrecy of their formulas was often presented as a selling point, with manufacturers claiming that the exact blend of components was a closely guarded trade secret. Customers took this as a mark of sophistication rather than a cause for concern. The lack of transparency suited sellers, allowing them to change recipes based on cost or availability without informing the public. In wealthier households, beauty products were stored in dedicated dressing tables or cabinets. Ladies might spend part of the morning carefully applying creams, powders, and drops. In smaller homes, these routines were often performed at the kitchen table, using a small mirror propped up against a jar or vase. The setting varied, but the desire for the finished look did not. The presence of these products in daily life meant that young women grew up watching their mothers and older sisters use them. By the time they were old enough to apply makeup themselves, the habit felt natural. Concerns about safety were rarely discussed openly, and the few who questioned the products were often dismissed as overly cautious. I think this shows how tradition can normalize even the most questionable practices. Beauty standards reinforced the use of these chemicals. A pale, smooth complexion was considered a sign of elegance, while blemishes or uneven skin were viewed as faults to be corrected. Photographs and paintings of the time often idealized these features, making the goal seem attainable with the right products. the social pressure to meet these standards could be as strong as any personal desire. Hair treatments also followed this trend. Some dyes contained lead or other heavy metals, promising rich, lasting colour. Others used harsh chemicals to straighten or curl hair. The immediate visual results were valued more than the potential for long-term damage. As with skin treatments, the effects of repeated exposure were slow to appear, making it easier for users to continue. The shops selling these products benefited from the overlap between beauty and medicine. Some creams and powders were marketed as both cosmetic and therapeutic, claiming to improve skin health while enhancing appearance. This dual promise widened their appeal and allowed sellers to charge higher prices. In social gatherings, subtle signs of cosmetic use could be a topic of conversation. A particularly smooth complexion or unusually bright eyes might prompt quiet admiration or speculation. For the user, these reactions reinforced the belief that the products were worth the effort and risk. By the later years of the century, some medical voices began to raise concerns about the cumulative effects of these chemicals. Articles appeared warning of lead poisoning or mercury damage. Still, the warnings were often buried among advertisements and competing claims. Without strict regulation, there was no consistent way to test or confirm the dangers. The market for beauty products remained strong because it catered to a deeply rooted desire, the wish to be seen favourably. In a society where appearances could influence marriage prospects, employment, and social acceptance, the cost of stopping seemed greater than the cost of continuing. Manufacturers understood this and tailored their marketing accordingly. The cycle persisted, with new products appearing and older ones being rebranded. The look of refinement stayed the same, even as the ingredients shifted slightly. The connection between beauty and status ensured that the demand did not wane, regardless of health implications. For many, the dressing table was a place of transformation. A few minutes with the right powders, creams, and drops could change how one felt about facing the day. The rituals were personal yet shaped by broader cultural forces. The hazards, though present, were hidden under layers of scent, colour, and polished glass. From the shelves of the chemist to the privacy of the home, these substances quietly shaped how people saw themselves and each other. In the next part, we will turn to the less visible side of Victorian drug culture, where substances intended for relief began to weave into the rituals of daily comfort. From the private rituals of beauty, the Victorian fascination with chemical enhancement extended to what people chose to drink. Among the options available, certain alcoholic beverages had effects that went beyond the usual warmth and relaxation associated with spirits. Chief among these was absinthe, a drink that carried a reputation for sophistication and a hint of danger. Its green hue and distinctive aroma set it apart from other spirits, and its popularity was particularly strong among artists, writers, and those who moved in bohemian circles. Absinthe was made from wormwood and a blend of other herbs, creating a flavour that was strong and often described as bitter with a lingering complexity. It was typically diluted with water before drinking, sometimes poured over a sugar cube placed on a special slotted spoon. The preparation became a small performance, adding to the drink's mystique. For some, the ritual was as important as the drink itself. The effects of absinthe were said to be different from other alcohols. Many users reported a heightened sense of creativity, a clarity of thought that allowed ideas to flow more freely. For those in the arts, this promise of inspiration was enough to make it a staple at gatherings. It is almost amusing how quickly people forget the risks when convinced that a drink can make them more talented. Alongside absinthe, other herbal spirits found their way into fashionable circles. Some were distilled with exotic ingredients brought from distant colonies, giving them an air of novelty. These drinks were not just about taste, but about the image they projected. To be seen with a glass of something unusual suggested a certain worldliness and refinement. In an era before strict regulation, the strength of these drinks varied greatly. Some batches of absinthe contained high levels of alcohol in addition to the psychoactive compounds from wormwood. This combination could produce powerful effects that were unpredictable. Yet the lack of standardization was rarely viewed as a drawback. If anything, it added to the sense of adventure. In cafes and private clubs, absinthe had its place on the menu. Regular patrons might develop a preference for a particular brand or style of preparation. The glassware, the spoons, and even the water used for dilution could be points of discussion. Drinking it became part of a larger social performance, a way to signal one's membership in a particular cultural set. The association between absinthe and artistic circles was reinforced by paintings, poems, and stories that depicted it as a source of inspiration. Whether these works reflected reality or simply built upon the drink's reputation, they helped cement its status. The connection between creativity and chemical alteration was romanticized, making abstinence seem almost unambitious by comparison. Some herbal liquors were marketed as medicinal, blurring the line between recreation and health. They were said to aid digestion, calm the nerves, or improve circulation. These claims gave them an added layer of acceptability, allowing people to justify their use even outside of purely social contexts. If energy drinks today were sold as both a cure and a luxury, the pattern would feel very familiar. The flavors of these drinks could be intense, and not everyone enjoyed them. For those who did, the taste became part of the allure, something that marked them as having a more sophisticated palate. The strong herbal notes were a deliberate departure from the sweeter, more accessible beverages of the time. This distinction reinforced their place among the fashionable elite. In private homes, the consumption of these drinks often followed the rhythms of social visits. A bottle might be brought out in the late afternoon or after dinner, shared among a small group. The conversation would take on a slower, more meandering quality as the effect set in. The setting might be a drawing room with heavy curtains and low lighting, the clink of glassware mingling with the faint scent of the herbs. The reputation of absinthe as a mind-expanding drink also attracted those who were curious about its more extreme effects. Some accounts spoke of vivid dreams, altered perceptions of time, and even hallucinations. While these experiences were not universal, they added to the drink's legend. The fact that it remained legal only reinforced the perception that it was safe enough for regular use. Critics of absinthe pointed to cases of overindulgence leading to erratic behavior, health problems, and in some cases, long-term dependency. These warnings, however, often struggled to compete with the drink's carefully cultivated image. In the public imagination, the risks were outweighed by the potential rewards of heightened creativity and social distinction. The popularity of absinthe and other herbal liquors was not limited to the upper classes. Cheaper versions, often of lower quality and questionable composition, were sold in poorer districts. These imitations sometimes contained dangerous additives, but for those who could not afford the premium brands, they offered a taste of the same fashionable experience. I find it telling that even at its most diluted and adulterated, the drink's status symbol still carried weight. By the close of the century, debates about the safety of absinthe began to grow louder. Some countries moved to restrict or ban its sale, citing concerns about its effects on health and behaviour. In Britain, however, it remained available, though its use never reached the level seen in parts of continental Europe. The legacy of these drinks lay not only in their flavours, but in the culture that surrounded them. They were markers of identity, tools for self-presentation, and, for some, a source of genuine pleasure. The blending of herbal complexity with the potency of alcohol created a combination that was hard to resist. The culture built around these drinks made them more than a way to pass an evening. They became quiet markers of taste and belonging, each glass carrying both the flavour of the herbs and the unspoken agreement of those who shared it. It was in the same spirit of indulgence that another world was quietly thriving, one built not on glasses and spoons, but on powders and pills kept out of sight. If there was one substance that could carry a worker from the first light of dawn to the last demands of the day, it was strychnine. In the Victorian era, this alkaloid was far from the poison it is remembered as today. It was marketed as a tonic, a stimulant, and even a remedy for fatigue. Chemists sold it over the counter in bottles no bigger than a hand. The clear liquid inside often labelled as an invigorating solution. A few drops in water or tea were said to sharpen the mind, strengthen the body, and keep weariness at bay. The bitter taste was a reminder of its potency, and for many, that bitterness became a signal that the day's work could continue without pause. Factories, docks, and construction sites were not known for their comfort. Long hours and repetitive labour wore down even the strongest bodies. Strychnine seemed to offer a solution. In small doses, it caused the muscles to tighten with a feeling of strength, the mind to clear, and the heart to beat faster. Employers sometimes encouraged its use, knowing that a more alert workforce meant higher productivity. It was an unspoken agreement between sellers, buyers, and those who profited from their labour. The risks were rarely discussed. Shops that sold strychnine did not hide it on dusty back shelves. It was displayed alongside other tonics and supplements, with labels promising vitality and focus. A clerk might recommend it to a merchant preparing for a busy market day, or a dockhand who had to unload goods well into the night. In advertisements, strychnine was not presented as a dangerous chemical, but as a modern innovation for those with ambition. The idea of a deadly overdose seemed distant, almost irrelevant, when the immediate effect was so tangible. Strychnine also found its way into the routines of travelling salesmen and messengers. These were people who had to cover long distances quickly, often on foot or by carriage, with little time for rest. A small bottle in the pocket was as essential as the day's route. By mid-afternoon, when fatigue usually set in, a few drops would bring back the sharpness needed to finish the journey. This convenience made it a popular choice not only among the working class but also among small business owners who could not afford to lose a day to exhaustion. It was common to hear of strychnine being taken before important events, such as trade fairs, auctions, or negotiations. A merchant standing behind his stall could remain energetic and alert even after hours of haggling. A clerk in a busy office could work through piles of documents without losing focus. The effect was not subtle, and those who used it regularly began to rely on it as part of their identity as hard-working, tireless individuals. The irony, of course, was that a substance meant to keep them alive and active could also be the very thing that ended their careers early. The problem was that strychnine's safe dose was dangerously close to its lethal dose. The same properties that tightened muscles and sharpened the mind could, in greater amounts, cause convulsions, breathing difficulty, and death. Yet in a time without strict regulation, the difference between a helpful and a harmful amount was left to the judgment of the user. And judgment, especially when clouded by dependence, was not always reliable. For some, the line between occasional use and daily necessity blurred quickly. The human body, under constant physical strain, adapted to the boost of strychnine provided. Without it, tasks seemed harder, days felt longer, and motivation lagged. This created a quiet cycle of reliance. It was not discussed openly, but the signs were visible. The person who never left home without their bottle, who became restless if a dose was delayed, or who measured their day not by the clock but by when they last took it. Some took strychnine in combination with other stimulants. Tea, coffee, and even small doses of cocaine were mixed into the daily routine, each intended to enhance the other. The result was a body pushed far beyond its natural limits. For a while, it worked. The worker could do more, stay awake longer, and maintain sharpness when others began to slow down. But the strain was cumulative, and when collapse came, it was sudden. Reports of deaths from strychnine poisoning did exist, though they were often vague and without public warning. Sometimes they were attributed to heart failure or nervous collapse, terms that sounded less alarming than poison. The victims were often buried with their secret intact, their bottles quietly discarded by family members. It is unsettling to think that the same counters where a family might buy flour or sugar were also selling the seeds of such endings. Despite the risks, Strychnine held a place in the public imagination as a mark of resilience. Endurance was a virtue in Victorian society, and anything that supported it was treated with respect. The idea of moderation was rarely emphasized. A man who could work longer than his peers was admired, not questioned about how he achieved it. Women, too, used it, particularly those who ran shops, took in laundry, or worked as seamstresses with deadlines that extended into the night. The boost it gave was equal opportunity. By the turn of the century, medical opinion began to shift. Studies suggested that the danger of strychnine was not exaggerated, and that its stimulating effects could be achieved through less hazardous means. Alternatives began to appear, some herbal, others synthetic, but none carried quite the same reputation. For those who had relied on strychnine for years, the change was unwelcome. It was not simply about energy. It was about the security of knowing they could meet the demands of the day, no matter how high they were. I can understand why giving it up felt like losing a trusted tool, even when that tool could turn against them without warning. As more information became available, the sale of pure strychnine slowly moved from open shelves to restricted access. The bottles became harder to find, the advertisements less bold. Still, in certain neighborhoods and among certain circles, it lingered, a quiet reminder of a time when strength could be bought for the price of a small glass vial. Those who knew its taste and its effects often remembered it with a mix of caution and nostalgia, a relic of an era when risk was part of the routine. The habit of reaching for something to push through fatigue did not vanish with strychnine's decline. It simply shifted to other substances, some safer, some equally dangerous. And in the spaces where stimulants still found their place, the same desire remained to turn one more hour of effort into a completed task, to win back a little more time from the body's natural limits. In that search for energy, new powders and pills began to appear, each promising to be the next great solution, and each carrying its own set of consequences. In the quieter corners of Victorian households, behind kitchen doors or in dim back rooms, another practice began to take root. This was the mixing of medicines at home, not in the manner of trained chemists, but in the hands of ordinary people who believed they had discovered their secret formulas. Bottles of patent medicines lined shelves, each with its own promise printed in ornate letters. Powders in paper packets were folded neatly in drawers. Glass jars held brightly coloured pills that looked almost decorative. All of these were easily bought, easily stored, and, in the minds of their owners, easily combined. The motivation was simple. If one medicine made them feel a little better, then adding another might help even more. If a tonic was said to improve energy, why not mix it with something that calmed the nerves? If a cough syrup worked for a neighbour, then surely combining it with a friend's headache remedy could make a more powerful solution. Without any medical knowledge, the logic seemed sound to them. They did not see interactions or toxicity. They saw an opportunity. Many people heard about these mixtures not from doctors but from neighbours, shopkeepers, or small advertisements tucked into newspapers. The recipes were often vague, suggesting a pinch of this or a few drops of that without any guidance on measurements. It was easy to follow such instructions when the goal was more about hope than precision. A bottle of laudanum could be mixed into a pot of soup, a spoonful of cocaine powder stirred into tea, or a tablet crushed into a glass of wine. The result might taste no different from the original food or drink, but the effects could be immediate and intense. Some of these mixtures were made in bulk. A family might keep a large jar of liquid in the pantry, taking a spoonful each morning before starting the day. Others preferred small batches, mixed fresh whenever needed. Either way, the ritual became part of daily life. It felt like taking control of one's health, like creating a personal cure. It was almost as if they believed the act of mixing itself added some kind of magic, even if it was just a dangerous blend of chemicals. Children sometimes became part of this pattern. A parent might think nothing of giving a child the same mixture they themselves were using, just in a smaller amount. Without realizing it, entire households could be consuming multiple drugs at once. The elderly were also frequent recipients of such combinations, with relatives hoping to ease pain, improve appetite, or lift mood. The line between care and risk blurred quickly. What is striking is how socially acceptable this was. Guests might be offered a drink or a sweet that had been enhanced with a little something extra, as if it were a sign of hospitality. In some circles, it became a mark of resourcefulness to have a favoured mixture ready to share. Friends would trade small bottles or packets, comparing results as though they were exchanging recipes for a favourite dish. The danger lay not only in the substances themselves but in the way they interacted. Combining sedatives with stimulants could confuse the body, causing sharp swings in heart rate or mood. Taking multiple painkillers together could overwhelm the liver or kidneys. Some mixtures dulled breathing to dangerous levels. Others overstimulated the nervous system until it trembled under the strain. Compared to modern times, where strict regulations required detailed labels and professional oversight, the Victorian kitchen pharmacy was more like a gamble played with one's health, yet the trust in these homemade remedies was strong. People often blamed illness or weakness on fate or bad luck rather than suspecting the mixtures they consumed. A sudden collapse might be seen as the return of a previous ailment, not as the consequence of a recent concoction. There was little understanding of overdose. Even when symptoms worsened after taking a mixture, the instinct was sometimes to take more, believing the illness simply needed a stronger push to be cured. The shops selling patent medicines encouraged this mindset. Their advertisements hinted that combining products could bring faster or better results. Some even sold boxed sets of different remedies meant to be taken together, without any real testing of safety. Labels were written in confident tones, using words like invigorating, restorative, and purifying without mentioning risks. The ornate designs and bright colours of the packaging made the products seem trustworthy, even luxurious. The absence of professional guidance meant there was no one to say when enough was enough. Doctors were expensive and not always nearby. In rural areas, self-mixing might have felt like the only option. In cities, it was simply convenient. Pharmacies sold ingredients freely. Market stalls might offer bottles of spirits laced with herbal extracts alongside other household goods. The boundaries between medicine, food, and drink became blurred. As the practice spread, so did the stories of remarkable recoveries or sudden tragedies. Some people swore by their mixtures, claiming they had more energy, better sleep, or sharper minds. Others fell into cycles of dependence, unable to start the day without their special blend. A few never woke up after an evening dose. Still, the stories of success were the ones most often shared, reinforcing the belief that home mixing was both clever and safe. In the privacy of one's home, the mixing could become a small ritual. The sound of a spoon scraping the bottom of a bottle, the swirl of liquid in a glass, the faint scent of alcohol or herbs rising into the air, all of it became familiar. For some, it was comforting, a signal that help was on the way. For others, it was exciting, a quiet moment of anticipation before the effects began. Looking back, it is difficult to separate ignorance from willful risk. Many Victorians genuinely did not understand the dangers of their combinations. Others may have suspected there was a risk but valued the perceived benefits more. In an age with limited medical knowledge and slow communication, the balance between cure and harm was often guessed at rather than measured. I find it telling that even with no scientific proof, people placed their trust so deeply in what was essentially an experiment conducted in their kitchens. The jars, bottles, and packets remained in place on shelves and tables, waiting for the next occasion to be used. For many, they were as much a part of the household as bread or tea. The temptation to experiment further was always present. It was not hard to imagine someone adding one more ingredient to see if the effect could be made just a little stronger. And as these homebrewed remedies simmered in kitchens and parlours, another trend was rising quietly in the background. It involved not just mixing medicines, but mixing them with indulgences from entirely different realms, creating concoctions that blurred the line between cure and pleasure, in a way that would soon captivate a different crowd. In the bustle of Victorian streets, there was no shortage of remedies promising to soothe a sore throat or quiet a persistent cough. Among these, the lozenge stood out for its convenience and its sweetness. Sold in small tins or wrapped neatly in paper, they were light enough to carry in a pocket and pleasant enough to take without hesitation. The idea was simple. Place one on the tongue, let it dissolve slowly, and feel relief spread through the throat. What was less obvious was the true strength of their ingredients. Many of these lozenges contained opium or its refined derivatives, including morphine or even heroin in later years. The quantities could vary from brand to brand, but the effect was unmistakable. Within minutes, the irritation faded, the coughing eased, and a calm warmth spread through the body. It was not just the throat that felt better. The mind, too, seemed to slow and quiet itself. In an age when medical oversight was minimal, this was taken as proof of effectiveness, not as a warning. Manufacturers advertised these lozenges openly, sometimes even in illustrated posters. Smiling children appeared in some of the ads, holding the tins or accepting a sweet from a parent. There was little distinction made between adult and child use. A sore throat was a sore throat, and the lozenge was presented as a universal remedy. It is almost impressive how a powerful narcotic could be wrapped in sugar and sold to everyone without a second thought. The convenience of the lozenge meant it fit easily into daily life. People might keep a tin on their bedside table, another in a desk drawer, and one in a coat pocket. They could be taken discreetly during church, while travelling, or even in meetings. The act of letting the lozenge dissolve was slow and deliberate, which added to its appeal. Unlike a bitter tonic or a strong-smelling syrup, there was no rush to swallow or hide the taste. Instead, there was the comfort of sweetness, paired with a subtle but growing sense of calm. Children, of course, were quick to enjoy them. A parent might hand one over to stop a cough during the night or to soothe a sore throat before school. The sugar masked any medicinal taste, making it easy for a child to ask for more. In some homes, these lozenges were given out as casually as peppermints. Few questioned whether that was safe. The relief was immediate and visible, and in those days, visible improvement was all the proof most people needed. The problem was that relief could become dependence. Taking one lozenge for a cough might lead to taking another simply to feel better, even when the cough had faded. For some, it became part of a daily habit, not unlike sipping tea or lighting a pipe. In households where tins were always within reach, the line between medicine and indulgence blurred quickly. Compared to today, where child-proof caps and dosage warnings cover every package, Victorian families lived in a world where medicine looked and tasted exactly like candy. The social acceptance of these lozenges was reinforced by how they were sold. Shops displayed them openly alongside harmless sweets. Street vendors carried them in baskets. They were even tucked into small gift boxes during holidays, a gesture of care and generosity. Friends might offer one as they chatted, much like offering a biscuit or a cup of tea. No one whispered about their contents. No one suggested they might be dangerous. When the effects became too strong, they were often mistaken for signs of rest. A child who became drowsy after several lozenges was simply said to be sleeping well. An adult who seemed calmer or less talkative after taking them was thought to be relaxed. The possibility that they were under the influence of opium was rarely considered. The effects were too normalized, too woven into the rhythm of daily life. As the market grew, so did the variety of flavors and packaging. Lozenges came in mint, lemon, honey, and even fruit blends. The tins were decorated with ornate lettering and small illustrations, making them attractive enough to keep and reuse. This only strengthened their place in the home. A tin of lozenges could sit openly on a mantelpiece or in a kitchen cupboard without raising suspicion. They were, after all, just for coughs and sore throats. Some physicians did raise concerns. Reports of drowsiness, slowed breathing, or sudden illness occasionally appeared in medical journals, but these warnings were small and easily overlooked by the public. Without a widespread understanding of addiction or long-term effects, the lozenges continued to sell. The trust in them was hard to break. People valued the immediate comfort over any vague, future risk. In certain social circles, the use of medicated lozenges even carried a hint of refinement. Offering one was seen as thoughtful. Carrying a tin of a well-known brand suggested one cared about health and quality. It was a small but noticeable marker of being prepared, of having the means to buy something better than the cheapest street remedy. Even when cheaper, less reputable versions appeared. The association with care and sophistication lingered. For the manufacturers, it was an ideal product. The ingredients were inexpensive, the sugar masked any bitterness, and the customer base included nearly everyone. The fact that the product could cause dependence only ensured continued sales. This cycle, relief, habit, purchase, was the backbone of their business. As long as the public saw the lozenges as harmless, there was no need to change the formula. From the quiet corners of parlours to the crowded aisles of markets, these small sweets moved constantly from hand to hand. They were both remedy and treat, both comfort and quiet risk. Over time, more people began to notice how often they reached for them, not just in illness but in moments of stress or boredom. I cannot help but think how easily something so small could become such a silent presence in a person's life. And as tins continued to clink in pockets and drawers, another product was beginning to gain its loyal following. It promised sharper focus and boundless energy, not through sweetness, but through a steady rush that kept the mind and body in motion for hours. Mercury had long been a fascination for physicians and alchemists. Its shimmering, liquid form seemed to hold a strange magic, and for centuries it had been used in ointments, powders, and potions. By the late Victorian era, it had found a comfortable place in medicine cabinets in the form of small, round pills. These were marketed as a cure-all, prescribed for constipation, syphilis, melancholy, and even common digestive troubles. The metallic taste was unmistakable, yet many considered it proof that the medicine was strong and effective. The pills were often coated to make them easier to swallow, but the core contained calomel, a mercury compound that was believed to purge impurities from the body. Physicians prescribed them liberally, seeing the immediate effects as signs of success. In reality, those effects often came from the toxic impact on the digestive system, which could cause violent bowel movements and temporary relief from bloating or discomfort. The danger, however, lay in long-term use. Mercury did not leave the body quickly. It accumulated, slowly poisoning the very patients it was meant to heal. These pills were small enough to be taken daily without much thought. People kept them in their kitchens, beside the sugar jar, or in small tins carried in pockets. They were taken before meals, after meals, or whenever discomfort struck. It is remarkable how something so inherently dangerous could be treated with the same casualness as a peppermint. Families saw them as part of a modern, scientific approach to health, a sign that they were keeping up with the latest advancements. The branding reinforced this belief. Advertisements featured authoritative doctors, laboratory equipment, and confident slogans about purity and precision. Mercury was presented not as a poison, but as a refined, controlled substance made safe through the skill of trained chemists. People wanted to believe in progress, and in an age where science seemed to be solving so many problems, it was easy to trust these claims. Those who took the pills regularly sometimes began to show early signs of mercury poisoning without realizing the cause. Tremors in the hands, excessive salivation, and changes in mood could all be explained away by other ailments or the stresses of daily life. For children given smaller doses, the symptoms could be even more subtle at first. It was not until more severe effects appeared, such as tooth loss or nerve damage, that suspicions arose. By then, the damage was often permanent. Some doctors began to question the safety of such frequent dosing. Medical journals occasionally printed cautious notes, suggesting the pills be reserved for more serious conditions or used only for short periods. But these warnings were small voices against the roar of confident marketing and satisfied customers. Compared to the strict regulations and labelling requirements today, the Victorian faith in medical advertising feels almost reckless. It was a world where trust was placed more in the elegance of a label than in the actual safety of what was inside. The appeal of these mercury pills was also tied to the idea of a quick, tangible result. Unlike herbal remedies that might take days to show any effect, the pills often produced noticeable changes within hours. This immediacy made them seem powerful, almost miraculous. People learned to associate the unpleasant metallic aftertaste with recovery, as if bitterness alone was proof of strength. There was also a certain prestige in using what was considered the latest scientific treatment. Those who could afford these pills signaled that they valued progress and had the means to access advanced medicine. In an era when illness could easily sideline a worker or disrupt a household, anything that promised fast recovery was worth the cost. Even when cheaper alternatives existed, many chose the mercury pills for their perceived superiority. Households kept them in small quantities, but in some cases they were shared among family and friends. A neighbour complaining of fatigue might be offered one with a reassuring nod. A traveller feeling unwell might take a dose before setting off again. The boundaries between prescription and casual use were thin, and the lack of clear dosing guidelines made it easy to take too much. Children were not entirely spared, though the pills were not marketed directly to them. Parents occasionally administered smaller portions for various complaints. The logic was simple if it worked for adults. A little must be safe for a child. This mindset ignored the cumulative nature of mercury poisoning, where even small amounts could add up over time. As the years passed, more cases of severe mercury poisoning began to surface. The connection to these pills could no longer be ignored by the medical community. Some manufacturers quietly reduced the mercury content, while others rebranded entirely, substituting less toxic ingredients but keeping the familiar look of the pills. Yet even as the formulas changed, the trust in the brand names remained, a testament to how deeply they had embedded themselves in daily life. By the turn of the century, public health campaigns were beginning to address the dangers of mercury more openly. Regulations slowly tightened, requiring clearer labelling and limiting their use in over-the-counter medicines. But for many years before that, countless households had relied on these pills without ever knowing the long-term cost. The damage they caused was a hidden legacy, scattered across generations. Even now, looking back, there is a strange tension between the harm and the hope they represented. These pills were not sold with malicious intent. They were born of a genuine belief in the promise of science and the drive to find solutions for human suffering. But they also serve as a reminder of how easily trust can be misplaced when progress outpaces caution. I often think that in their eagerness to embrace modernity, people sometimes hold on too tightly to the very things that would undo them. And as the tins of mercury pills gradually disappeared from bedside tables and kitchen shelves, another set of remedies was already taking their place. They came not as gleaming metal spheres but as powders and liquids, mixed with the promise of gentle healing and flavoured to mask their quiet dangers. Tobacco smoke was not confined to smoky bars or gentlemen's clubs. It drifted through every layer of daily life, from the parlour to the street, from the workplace to the garden bench. Cigarettes, cigars, and pipes were as common as cutlery, and their use was not bound by age or occasion. Men smoked in public squares, women smoked at home, and even children were sometimes seen with small hand-rolled cigarettes between their fingers. The act itself was unremarkable, an everyday habit like pouring tea or brushing one's coat before leaving the house. Cigarettes were cheap and easy to find. Small corner shops sold them in loose bundles or paper packets, and tobacconists displayed an endless variety of blends. Cigars offered a stronger, slower burn, often reserved for moments of leisure or celebration. Pipes were cherished possessions, each one darkened and polished by years of use, its stem moulded to the shape of its owner's teeth. The air itself seemed to belong to the smokers, while the non-smokers were just borrowing it, If someone found the smell unpleasant, they were often met with indifference. The expectation was to tolerate it. Factories producing tobacco products ran continuously, and the smell from their chimneys added to the already heavy industrial air. The mixture of coal smoke, factory fumes, and tobacco created a haze that clung to clothing, hair, and curtains. Opening a window did little to clear it. In many homes, the walls and ceilings gradually took on a yellowish tint, a permanent reminder of years of indoor smoking. Children were not excluded from this culture. It was common to see boys in workyards or on street corners smoking together during breaks. In some working-class neighbourhoods, it was seen almost as a sign of maturity. Even younger children inhaled the second-hand smoke of their parents and older siblings without question. No one measured the harm it could do. Instead, it was folded into the rhythm of family life, another shared element of the air they breathed. Public transport was no refuge from the haze. Trains had carriages thick with smoke, carriages where the floor was littered with ash and the stale scent of tobacco hung in the upholstery. Trams and omnibuses allowed passengers to smoke freely. Some carried small metal trays to catch ashes, but more often than not, the remains were simply flicked to the floor. Ventilation was a concept more talked about than practiced. Cafes and restaurants treated smoking as part of the service. Ashtrays were standard on every table, and waiters would sometimes offer matches along with menus. In more expensive establishments, cigars were brought to the table on polished trays, cut and lit by attentive staff. The social aspect of smoking was as important as the act itself, with groups lingering for hours over coffee and cigarettes. It is almost amusing to imagine a modern cafe tolerating the same dense clouds without a single complaint. In workplaces, smoking was an accepted companion to labour. Factory workers smoked during breaks, clerks smoked at their desks, and dock workers smoked while loading ships. Offices had little reason to ban it. The lingering smell was as much a part of the environment as the ink and paper. For many, a cigarette was a short escape from monotony. A few minutes to stand by a doorway or lean against a wall and watch the smoke drift away. The culture surrounding cigars and pipes carried its rituals. Selecting a cigar involved smelling, rolling, and sometimes clipping it before purchase. Pipe smokers took pride in their chosen blend of tobacco, often mixing it themselves to create a signature scent. These habits were personal and deliberate, lending an air of craft to the broader culture of casual smoking. The smell of pipe tobacco, sweeter and more aromatic than cigarettes, was a familiar comfort in many homes. Health warnings were nearly non-existent. Some physicians even endorsed smoking in moderation, claiming it could aid digestion or calm the nerves. Tobacco companies happily included these endorsements in advertisements, pairing them with images of elegant men and women. There was no clear separation between marketing and medical reassurance. The connection between smoking and disease was not yet part of the public conversation. The omnipresence of smoke also shaped the visual character of cities. Streets looked hazy, especially in colder months when breath mingled with smoke in the frosty air. Indoors, lamps and gaslights glowed softly through a thin veil. It gave a certain muted quality to the colours of rooms and streets, though not in a way that anyone found remarkable at the time. This was simply how the world looked. Smoking also played a role in hospitality. Offering a cigarette or cigar to a guest was as common as offering a drink. Tobacco tins and humidors were kept stocked for visitors, and the act of lighting someone's cigarette was considered a polite gesture. Entire social exchanges were built around this small ritual, the first puff marking the start of a conversation. For those who did not smoke, finding a place free of it was difficult. Parks offered some respite, though even there, smokers were scattered along the benches and walking paths. The idea of designated smoking areas was still decades away. In homes, the only truly smoke-free rooms were those rarely used, such as storage spaces or attics. Even bedrooms often carried the faint scent of tobacco from the hallway. Despite the normalization of smoking, some disliked it. They might quietly choose to sit near open windows or avoid crowded rooms. yet their objections rarely led to change. The social weight of the habit was too strong, woven into the fabric of both public and private life. I sometimes think that the sheer pervasiveness of smoking made it invisible, even to those standing in the thickest clouds. This world of constant smoke was not eternal. Over time, new ideas about health and cleanliness would challenge the habit's dominance. But in this period, it was as fixed in place as the cobblestones in the street. It shaped the air people breathed, the spaces they inhabited, and the way they interacted with one another. And as the smoke curled and lingered, other substances were quietly making their way into daily routines, each promising comfort in its own form, each leaving a different mark on the body. Chemical sedatives of this period were not simply meant to calm the nerves. In the right dose, they could strip away all sensation of urgency, leaving the mind blank and unbothered. Many who used them did so not out of medical necessity, but as a way to create an empty mental space, free from the demands of work, family, or social expectation. A few drops or a small tablet could turn the noise of daily life into something far away, like hearing a conversation from the end of a long hallway. Tasks that had seemed important before suddenly felt optional, and conversations that once required thought were met with a distant smile and little else. The ingredients varied from one preparation to another. Some were mixtures of barbiturates, chloral hydrate, or bromides, each affecting the nervous system in its way. Others included a blend of alcohol and sedative compounds, ensuring that the effect set in quickly and stayed for hours. These were not finely tuned prescriptions, but blunt tools, designed to overwhelm the mind's natural alertness. The instructions on the bottle often made light of their strength, as if they were no more dangerous than a spoonful of cough syrup. It was as if the more a drug could erase your awareness, the more casually it was handed over the counter. The appeal was obvious. In an era where the pace of urban life was accelerating and expectations were rising, the thought of removing all mental strain at will was enticing. People with demanding jobs, especially in finance or commerce, found that sedatives offered a temporary escape from constant decision-making. For homemakers managing noisy children and endless chores, the promise of an hour or two of detachment felt like a gift. Even those without clear responsibilities might turn to them simply to dissolve feelings of restlessness. Social gatherings were not immune to their presence. A discreet dose before attending an event could smooth over anxiety and dampen any self-consciousness. Conversation flowed more easily, not because one was more confident, but because the stakes no longer seemed real. It was not uncommon for groups of friends to share their sedative of choice, treating it as a quiet indulgence rather than a controlled substance. In private settings, this sometimes led to hours of sitting in near silence. The group connected not by words but by the shared absence of concern. Medical professionals were divided. Some praised these chemicals for their ability to treat insomnia, nervous exhaustion, or hysteria. Others warned, quietly and without much force, that dependence could develop quickly. In truth, the line between therapeutic use and habitual use was nearly invisible. A person might begin by taking a sedative only in moments of extreme stress, then start to use it before routine social calls, and eventually find themselves unable to face any task without it. In today's world, the equivalent would be carrying a smartphone app that could instantly delete your anxiety and using it for every minor inconvenience. Workplaces began to see the effects. Employees who relied too heavily on sedatives would sometimes miss deadlines or produce work that lacked focus. The drugs did not always make people sleepy. In some cases, they simply removed all sense of urgency, leaving the user adrift in a haze of apathy. Supervisors might notice but rarely confront the issue directly, especially if the worker in question was otherwise well-liked or socially connected. In industries where connections mattered more than output, the habit could persist for years without consequence. For those without steady work, sedatives became a way to make long days feel shorter. Hours that might have been spent in boredom or discomfort passed in a blur. There was no rush to change circumstances, because the drugs dulled both the dissatisfaction and the desire to act. This effect, while comforting in the moment, could quietly anchor someone in place, preventing them from seeking better opportunities or improving their situation. I think the most dangerous part was not the drug itself, but how easy it made it to accept a life you didn't want. The packaging of these sedatives often hid their potency. Bottles were small and elegant, with labels written in flowing script or adorned with decorative borders. Instructions were minimal, and there was little to no warning about combining them with alcohol or other drugs. Some preparations were even marketed with images of calm, well-dressed individuals lounging in comfortable rooms, suggesting that the sedatives were part of a refined lifestyle rather than a medical treatment. In the home, sedatives could be found in kitchen cabinets, bedroom drawers, or tucked into handbags. They were not locked away or treated as dangerous, which meant that curious children or unknowing visitors could easily access them. In some households, they were placed alongside everyday items like tea, sugar, or biscuits. This casual placement reinforced the idea that they were harmless, just another option for improving one's day. Over time, tolerance became a problem. Regular users found they needed larger doses to achieve the same effect. This could lead to accidental overdoses, especially when different sedatives are combined or mixed with alcohol. Even when the immediate risks were avoided, the long-term effects on memory, coordination, and mood were rarely considered. Because these changes happened slowly, they could be dismissed as part of aging or the natural course of life. Despite these dangers, demand remained high. Sedatives fit neatly into the rhythm of a society that valued composure and social grace over raw energy or outspoken emotion. A person who appeared calm and unruffled was admired, even if their tranquility was chemically induced. The willingness to use these drugs was, in some circles, seen as a mark of modern sophistication. This reliance on chemical calm would eventually face challenges from new medical research and shifting cultural attitudes. But in the period we're considering, the habit was secure in its place. People trusted the bottle more than they trusted their ability to cope, and for many, that trade felt fair. As the popularity of these sedatives continued, they would not remain confined to private rooms or small gatherings. They were about to step into a more public role, tied to activities far beyond quiet evenings at home. Chloroform was developed as a medical anesthetic, intended for use in carefully controlled settings under the supervision of a trained professional. In the Victorian era, however, it began to wander far outside the walls of the operating room. What started as a breakthrough for painless surgery was soon treated, in some circles, as an exotic novelty to be shared for amusement. The smell was sharp and heavy, and the effect was quick, a brief rush of dizziness, a sudden softness in the limbs, and then a disorienting fog that left the world feeling strangely distant. In the wrong hands, this was not a tool for healing, but a means of turning a quiet gathering into something much less predictable. Small bottles of chloroform could be purchased through chemists without much difficulty. Those who had the means often kept a supply at home, sometimes stored alongside other household remedies. In an era when chemical hazards were not well understood, the idea of inhaling a substance purely for entertainment was not met with the alarm it would provoke today. It was instead treated as an eccentric indulgence, the kind of thing a daring host might offer to break the monotony of an evening. It was a time when knocking yourself half unconscious was considered a perfectly reasonable way to make guests laugh. One of the most infamous party activities involved soaking a handkerchief in chloroform and passing it around the room. Guests would take turns breathing in the fumes, giggling as their knees wobbled and their heads swayed. In some cases, the laughter would be followed by a sudden slump into unconsciousness, which only added to the spectacle for onlookers. It was considered part of the fun, a shared experiment in bodily sensation, without much thought given to what was happening inside the brain and lungs of the person inhaling it. Outside of private homes, chloroform sometimes appeared in public entertainments. Street performers and travelling shows might demonstrate their effects for a curious crowd, presenting it as a scientific marvel rather than a dangerous chemical. Spectators were fascinated by the idea that a simple inhalation could so completely alter a person's state, rendering them docile, dazed, or unconscious within moments. It was not framed as a risk, but as a display of modern ingenuity, a chemical trick made possible by the advances of the age. There were more questionable uses as well. In social situations where someone was seen as too talkative, too argumentative, or simply unwelcome, it was not unheard of for others to joke about calming them down with chloroform. In certain cases, this was done without the person's consent, treated as a prank. The potential for harm was enormous, but the social norms of the time allowed such behaviour to be brushed aside. In the modern world, this would be the equivalent of casually disabling someone at a dinner party and expecting everyone to find it charming. Medical professionals who had once championed chloroform began to grow uneasy. Reports of accidents, some fatal, circulated quietly. There were cases where the inhalation lasted too long, or the concentration was too high, leading to respiratory failure or heart complications. Yet warnings often went unheeded outside of clinical environments. Among the public, the risks seemed distant, especially when the chemical was framed as a harmless thrill. In homes where chloroform was part of the social repertoire, it often became tied to certain kinds of gatherings. It might be brought out during a particularly dull moment as a way to revive the mood. Guests who had tried it before might encourage newcomers to join in, downplaying any discomfort and focusing on the moments of light-headed amusement. Over time, its use became a sort of ritual, one more marker of a household's modern, adventurous spirit. The problem was that chloroform was not forgiving. The line between a fleeting, dizzy high and a dangerous loss of consciousness was thin. Inhaling too deeply, or for too long, could quickly turn amusement into panic. Those who had seen someone collapse completely were sometimes shaken, but the memory did not always stop them from trying again. For others, the danger was part of the appeal, the feeling of flirting with a boundary that most people never approached. It is worth remembering that these were people living in a time when chemical knowledge was expanding faster than public awareness of its dangers. Many believed that if a substance was available for purchase, it must be safe in ordinary use. This assumption extended beyond chloroform to countless other preparations, from tonics to powders. The difference was that chloroform acted immediately, and its effects were visible to everyone present. Over the years, the social novelty began to fade. Medical authorities pushed for greater control over its sale, and newspapers occasionally published cautionary accounts. But for a period, it occupied a strange place in daily life, something between a medical tool and a party favour. The fact that it could be both says much about the Victorian relationship with new technologies and substances. I cannot help thinking that their confidence in safe fun had more to do with ignorance than bravery. By the time awareness of the dangers caught up with public use, many had already experienced its effects firsthand. For some, the memory was of laughter and harmless dizziness. For others, it carried a sharper edge, marked by moments of genuine fear. In either case, chloroform left its imprint as one of the more reckless indulgences of the age, a reminder of how easily the line between medicine and amusement could be blurred. As the popularity of chloroform in social settings declined, new chemical fads emerged to take its place. The appetite for altering one's state, whether for fun, relief, or escape, did not disappear. It simply shifted to other bottles, other powders, and other promises, each carrying its risks beneath a layer of novelty and charm. And among these, one in particular would be marketed not for laughter or dares, but for its supposed ability to sharpen the mind and sustain the body in ways that seemed almost miraculous. Steam baths inspired by the Turkish hammam had already gained a certain mystique in Victorian society. Imported from the Ottoman tradition and adapted for European tastes, they were marketed as a sophisticated way to cleanse the body, refresh the spirit, and restore one's health. In large cities, purpose-built steam houses appeared, decorated with elaborate tiling, marble benches, and warm, dim lighting to suggest an atmosphere of exotic luxury. Clients entered expecting to be both purified and pampered, emerging into the world healthier than when they had stepped in. That was the promise, at least. The process began with a gradual acclimatization. Attendants would usher guests into a warm, steamy chamber where the air was thick and damp, wrapping around the skin like a heavy cloth. The warmth induced a slow, steady perspiration, which was said to carry away impurities. In reality, much of what was lost was water, not toxins, but this distinction was not part of the marketing. Patrons relaxed on smooth stone benches, sipping from small cups provided by the establishment. The contents of those cups were not always as innocent as the health rhetoric suggested. Some steam bath operators offered herbal infusions, brewed from imported leaves and roots, claiming to improve circulation or calm the nerves. Others provided something stronger, brandy, fortified wine, or even absinthe for those who wanted a more immediate sense of indulgence. The combination of alcohol and high heat could create a light-headed sensation much sooner than either would alone. It was a curious kind of wellness when your detox routine began with a generous pour of liquor. To the clientele, this mixture of heat and drink was part of the appeal. The steam bath was not merely a hygienic ritual but a social event. Gentlemen might lounge together discussing business, politics, or scandal, each with a cup in hand. Wealthier patrons sometimes booked private rooms, where the drinks flowed more freely, turning a supposed health treatment into a private party. In mixed company settings, there was an added air of flirtation, framed under the respectable cover of self-care. Advertisements leaned heavily into the imagery of rejuvenation. Illustrated pamphlets showed robust men and graceful women stepping out of the steam chamber, looking refreshed and glowing. They spoke of ancient wisdom combined with modern amenities, as though centuries of Turkish tradition had been distilled into the perfect urban leisure activity. Nowhere did they mention the potential hazards of mixing intense heat with alcohol, nor the fact that prolonged stays in such conditions could strain the heart and lungs. There were also more subtle issues. The steam rooms, especially in the more exclusive venues, were not sterilized to any reliable standard. Towels and cups were often reused without thorough cleaning. The shared, enclosed environment made it easy for respiratory illnesses to spread, though this was rarely acknowledged. In modern terms, it was like paying a premium to sit in a humid, overheated bar with strangers' germs circulating freely. For many patrons, the lack of tangible health benefits was beside the point. The steam bath was an experience, a statement of lifestyle. It was something to talk about afterwards, proof of one's refinement and worldliness. Drinking in such surroundings, with the air warm and heavy around you, carried a feeling of decadence that was hard to replicate elsewhere. That sense of escape mattered more than whether it truly improved one's health. Not all steam baths were equal in their offerings. Some maintained a stricter focus on the bathing ritual, with minimal or no alcohol service, emphasizing massage and exfoliation instead. Others leaned into the social drinking aspect, becoming known as discreet places where business deals could be made or romantic connections initiated. In these establishments, the line between health treatment and leisure club was blurred almost completely. Attendants played a role in shaping the experience. Skilled ones could make the service feel personal, remembering a client's preferred drink or how long they liked to remain in each stage of the bathing process. Less scrupulous attendants might encourage heavier drinking, knowing it led to larger tips. In either case, the customer was guided along a path that was as much about atmosphere as it was about physical care. For the working classes, access to such establishments was rare. Public baths did exist, but they lacked the luxury trappings and the alcohol service. The Turkish-style steam baths were a domain of the middle and upper classes, another marker of the growing divide in Victorian leisure culture. This exclusivity only heightened their appeal to those who could afford them. In time, the medical community began to question the claims made by these establishments. Reports surfaced of patrons fainting, suffering headaches, or leaving more exhausted than when they arrived. There were even a few documented cases of more severe outcomes, though these were discreetly handled to avoid scandal. Still, the image of the steam bath as a place of renewal persisted, bolstered by clever advertising and word-of-mouth praise. It is tempting to view these steam baths as harmless indulgences, but the reality was more complex. The combination of heat, alcohol, and long periods of inactivity could be genuinely risky, especially for those with underlying health conditions. Yet few patrons gave this much thought. They were there for the comfort, the company, and the feeling of stepping into another world for a while. I find it remarkable how often history shows people willing to trade real safety for the illusion of vitality. As with so many Victorian-era trends, the steam bath's reputation eventually shifted. It retained its place in certain circles but lost some of its mass appeal as other leisure activities became fashionable. Nonetheless, its legacy as a blend of health ritual and social indulgence remains a telling example of how easily wellness can be shaped to fit pleasure. And just as some sought luxury in warmth and steam, others turned their attention to a far colder form of treatment, one that promised a different kind of stimulation for both body and mind. The fascination with bodily rejuvenation in Victorian society did not end with steam and heat. As interest in technology grew, so did curiosity about its potential to heal. Among the many devices that promised renewed vitality, electric therapy machines captured public imagination. They were small, mechanical contraptions that could be kept in a respectable drawing room and demonstrated to guests. The idea of harnessing the invisible force of electricity for health seemed thrilling, even a little daring. To many, it was the perfect blend of science and self-improvement. These machines delivered a weak electric current through the body, usually via handheld electrodes or conductive pads placed on the skin. The sensation was often described as a mild tingling, sometimes an odd pulsing in the muscles. Operators claimed that these effects stimulated circulation, strengthened nerves, and even cured ailments ranging from joint stiffness to chronic fatigue. It was an era in which the line between legitimate medical treatment and theatrical display could be very thin. There is something oddly fitting about Victorians sitting politely while being mildly electrocuted in the name of health. The marketing for these devices was relentless. Advertisements portrayed them as marvels of modern engineering, bringing hospital-grade treatment into the home. Engravings in newspapers showed healthy-looking men and women, posed in their finest clothing, holding the handles of a machine while smiling serenely. The text assured readers that the treatment was perfectly safe and that it relied on the latest scientific discoveries. For a public already enchanted by technological progress, this was enough to overlook the lack of consistent medical proof. In practice, electric therapy sessions were often more spectacle than science. In private homes, a machine might be brought out during gatherings to entertain guests. The faint shock, surprising but not painful, became part of the evening's amusements. In some clubs and salons, it became a point of fashion to endure a treatment in front of others, as if proving one's sophistication by embracing the future. The fact that no one could really measure the long-term benefits did not seem to matter. Some machines were hand-cranked, allowing the operator to adjust the strength of the current with a simple turn of the handle. Others were powered by wet cell batteries, which required occasional maintenance but provided a more consistent flow of electricity. Instruction manuals, when provided, tended to be vague about the proper duration and frequency of use. If modern fitness devices were as unregulated as these, we would probably see living rooms full of people experimenting on themselves in equally strange ways. Medical professionals were divided on the matter. A few embraced the trend, incorporating electric therapy into their practices for certain conditions. Others dismissed it entirely, warning that it had little scientific merit and could be harmful in some cases. The lack of standardized equipment made it difficult to assess safety or effectiveness, and reports of burns, nerve irritation, or muscle spasms occasionally surfaced. Still, these warnings did little to slow the enthusiasm of the public. Electric therapy also found a place in gendered marketing. For men, It was promoted as a way to restore vigour, stamina, and overall robustness. For women, it was often suggested as a treatment for nervous disorders or fatigue, conditions that were poorly understood but frequently diagnosed in the Victorian medical system. The appeal of a machine that could restore one's energy without the effort of physical exercise was undeniable for many. The sensation of the current itself varied from person to person. Some described it as invigorating, like a sudden rush of energy. Others found it uncomfortable, even unpleasant, but endured it for the sake of perceived benefits. It was not uncommon for first-time users to flinch or laugh involuntarily at the initial shock, adding an element of unpredictability to the sessions. In some cases, electric therapy was combined with other treatments, such as massage or hydrotherapy. This layering of methods gave the impression of a comprehensive approach to health, though it was often more about presentation than measurable results. The ritual of preparing the equipment, arranging the electrodes, and gradually increasing the current created a sense of anticipation, even drama. The treatment became a performance in itself, one that could be repeated as often as desired. Despite the scientific uncertainty, the machines continued to sell. Their very presence in a household signalled an embrace of modernity. Guests might be invited to try the latest invention, much as one might today offer a seat in a newly purchased massage chair. For some, owning such a device was as much about status as it was about health. Over time, the novelty began to fade. New medical technologies emerged, and electricity became a more familiar part of daily life. Powering lamps, trams, and household appliances. Electric therapy machines lost some of their mystique, relegated to the status of curiosities or stored away in attics. Yet their legacy persisted as an example of how easily technological excitement could blur the line between innovation and illusion. What stands out in hindsight is how willingly people submitted themselves to these unproven treatments. They were not coerced or misled in any aggressive way. They simply wanted to believe that progress could be felt, literally, as a spark running through their skin. It is strange how quickly the promise of science can become a form of entertainment when mixed with novelty and social display. Just as electricity had captivated Victorian imaginations, another frontier was quietly gaining attention, one that dealt not with sparks and wires but with the chemistry of the mind, promising a very different kind of transformation. After the fascination with electric currents, Victorian society's appetite for unusual health remedies often led them back to something far more ancient, mineral-rich water. Spa towns across Europe and the colonies flourished, each claiming its springs were blessed with unique healing powers. Among the most celebrated were those that bubbled up with a distinct sulphur smell, often described as rotten eggs. Visitors came in droves, convinced that enduring the taste was a small price to pay for the promise of better health. These spa waters were marketed as cures for a wide range of ailments: gout, rheumatism, skin conditions, digestive troubles, and even melancholy were all said to improve after a course of drinking the mineral water. Some advertisements even suggested it could ease the pains of a broken heart, as if the combination of natural elements and a tranquil setting could mend the mind as well as the body. There is something rather amusing about people travelling miles just to sip what smells like the drainage from a volcano. The experience was rarely confined to the water itself. Spa towns cultivated an entire social environment around the act of drinking it. Elegant pavilions were built over the springs, where men and women could gather in their finest walking clothes, holding specially designed glasses to catch the steaming liquid. The ritual had as much to do with being seen as it did with the supposed medicinal benefits. Walking slowly along the promenade, pausing to take small sips, became an integral part of the day's activities. The taste was often unpleasant, sometimes even intolerable to newcomers. Guides and attendants reassured visitors that the more offensive the flavour, the more potent the cure. In this way, the discomfort became a kind of badge of honour. People would speak with a certain pride about their ability to drink the water without grimacing, as if mastering the taste demonstrated both resilience and commitment to health. If modern health trends worked on this principle, we would probably see gyms serving shots of bitter herbal sludge as proof of dedication. Medical practitioners were divided on the real benefits of these spa waters. Some endorsed them wholeheartedly, pointing to anecdotal cases of improvement and centuries of tradition. Others were more skeptical, suggesting that the clean air, gentle exercise, and change of routine were likely the true causes of any recovery. Still, the ritual of drinking the water under a physician's supervision added a layer of authority to the experience, and many patients accepted the practice without question. For wealthier visitors, the spa trip became a seasonal event. They would book rooms in the same grand hotels year after year, seeing familiar faces and resuming acquaintances made in previous seasons. Meals were carefully timed to coincide with drinking schedules, and musicians often played in the background to make the process more pleasant. The entire setting was crafted to reinforce the idea that one was participating in something refined and healthful. Not everyone drank the water for medical reasons. For some, it was a fashionable pastime, an excuse to travel and socialize. The springs attracted royalty, politicians, writers, and artists, each leaving behind their impressions in letters, diaries, or published accounts. These writings, often flattering to the host town, helped sustain the image of the spa as a destination worth visiting, regardless of whether the water had any tangible effect. The sulfur-rich water itself was drawn from underground sources, sometimes at considerable heat. In some towns, visitors could choose between drinking it warm or allowing it to cool slightly, though both versions retained the same pungent odour. Glasses were often rinsed and reused, a detail that today might raise hygiene concerns but was accepted without hesitation at the time. Some combined drinking with bathing in the same mineral water, believing that internal and external treatment together provided the best results. Bathhouses connected to the springs offered a range of services, from simple soaking pools to more elaborate steam chambers. The entire spa complex became a self-contained world where visitors could pass the days moving between pavilions, baths, and gardens. Merchants in the area capitalized on the trend by selling bottled versions of the spa water for visitors to take home. These were marketed as a way to continue treatment after leaving, though the bottled product often lost much of its distinctive smell and taste during storage. Still, for those who swore by its effects, having a supply at home was worth the expense. It is easy to imagine how such places thrived for decades, combining the appeal of travel, social interaction, and health improvement into a single package. Even if the medical benefits were uncertain, the emotional boost of escaping daily routines was undeniable. I sometimes think the greatest cure offered by these spas was simply the chance to slow down and live at a different pace for a while. By the end of the 19th century, spa culture had become firmly established as part of the Victorian health landscape, while newer medical treatments and urban developments would eventually challenge its dominance. The image of refined men and women sipping from delicate glasses under ornate ceilings remained an enduring symbol of the era. And for many, the stories of these trips were worth as much as any physical benefit, told and retold long after the actual taste of the water had faded from memory. Just as the Victorian public could embrace the sharp tang of sulphur in pursuit of health, they were also willing to endure other peculiar remedies, some of which involved far stranger substances and an even greater leap of faith. In many Victorian households, the pursuit of health was not entrusted entirely to shop-bought remedies. Alongside the growing popularity of bottled tonics, patent pills, and powders from the pharmacy, families continued to rely on remedies passed down through generations. These were not seen as opposing methods, but rather as parallel paths to the same goal. It was common to find a jar of mustard powder in the kitchen, ready to be mixed into a paste for chest compresses, sitting right next to a bottle of mass-produced liver tonic with an elaborate label. Both were considered essential, and both were used without much questioning of their effectiveness. The mustard poultice was among the most trusted of the old methods. It was believed to draw out illness, ease congestion, and stimulate circulation. The process was straightforward: mix mustard powder with flour and water, spread it on a cloth, and press it against the skin until the burning sensation became too strong to bear. The discomfort was part of the treatment, a sign that it was working. It is rather funny that the measure of a cure was often how much it made you squirm. At the same time, the newer commercial remedies were finding their place on the family shelf. Liver tonics, nerve tonics, blood purifiers, each one promising to restore vitality and balance. The labels were full of confident claims, often with endorsements from supposed doctors or satisfied customers. They rarely mentioned side effects, and doses were guessed more than measured. In this environment, mixing old and new was seen not as reckless but as thorough. Why rely on just one method when two, or even three, might double the chances of recovery? In many families, the older generation acted as gatekeepers to this combined approach. Grandparents, aunts, or older neighbours had years of experience with traditional remedies and felt responsible for passing this knowledge along. Their instructions carried authority, and younger members followed them, even when those instructions conflicted with the printed directions on a bottle. If modern households followed this logic, we might see people mixing online health tips with prescription medication and calling it balanced treatment. The overlap between these two worlds could be seen in the shopping habits of the time. A trip to town might involve stopping at the apothecary for a new bottle of syrup and then visiting the market to buy herbs, roots, or spices for home recipes. Some households kept a dedicated cabinet or shelf for medical supplies, where jars of dried chamomile sat beside tins of mass-produced lozenges. In some cases, even the same ingredient could be found in both forms: raw ginger root from the grocer and ginger extract in a labelled vial from the pharmacy. There was little sense of risk in combining these remedies. The prevailing belief was that natural, homemade preparations were inherently safe, while shop-bought medicines carried the authority of science. Both assumptions could be dangerously wrong. Mustard poultices, for example, could cause blistering if left on too long, while many patent medicines contained alcohol, opium, or other potent substances in undisclosed quantities. Yet caution was minimal, as the focus remained on relieving symptoms as quickly as possible. The cultural weight of tradition also played a role. Using a recipe handed down from a parent or grandparent was a way of honouring family history. It reinforced the idea that health was a matter of both personal responsibility and shared knowledge. Commercial products, for their part, tapped into the Victorian fascination with progress and modernity. Together, they created a strange hybrid of old-world habit and new-world marketing. In wealthier households, the combination of methods could become elaborate. A person suffering from chest pain might receive a mustard compress in the morning, followed by a dose of a liver tonic at midday and a spoonful of a honey and vinegar mixture in the evening. Each was thought to work in its way, and using them together was simply covering all bases. There was no structured plan, only the confidence that more was better. In poorer homes, the pattern was similar but adapted to what was affordable. The shop-bought medicines might be purchased in smaller quantities or only when symptoms were severe, while the traditional remedies filled the gaps. It was a practical blend of economy and belief, shaped as much by necessity as by choice. Merchants and apothecaries recognized this tendency and began to market their products as complementary to traditional remedies rather than replacements. Advertisements sometimes mentioned how a tonic could support the body alongside your trusted home cures, making the combination feel both legitimate and wise. This framing encouraged customers to see no conflict between the two approaches. Despite the ease with which they were combined, the results were often unpredictable. Some people genuinely felt better, whether from the remedies themselves or from the care and attention that came with them. Others saw no change or even suffered harm from overuse. Yet in the absence of strict medical oversight, these mixed regimens remained popular. It is worth noting that the act of preparing a home remedy was often as important as its intended effect. Mixing ingredients, heating them, and applying them carefully created a ritual that felt inherently therapeutic. The smell of mustard warming in a cloth, or the sight of a familiar herbal infusion steeping in a cup could bring comfort before any physical change occurred. I have always thought that half the power of such treatments lay in the quiet reassurance they gave, rather than in any chemical property. By the late Victorian period, this blended approach to health had become an ingrained part of everyday life. Pharmacies continued to expand their offerings, but the family kitchen remained a place where cures were made as well as meals. For many, the best hope for wellness lay not in choosing between tradition and commerce, but in keeping one foot in each world. This habit of layering treatments, one homemade, one from the shop, prepared the ground for even more experimental health practices to come, especially those that blurred the line between medicine and novelty. Some of these would prove harmless enough, while others would push the limits of safety far more than a mustard poultice ever could. The pattern was simple, and that was part of why it lasted so long. A person took a medicine and began to feel better, at least for a while. Then the side effects would appear. Sometimes they were mild, a bit of dizziness or a restless night. Other times, they were more troubling, a new ache, a sudden loss of appetite, or a racing heart. Instead of linking the problem to the drug itself, most people believed it was just another illness taking hold, and so they looked for another medicine to fix it. This cycle was self-sustaining. The more medicines a person took, the more likely they were to experience side effects. The more side effects they had, the more they sought new remedies. It is almost impressive how an endless loop can be built out of people's determination to feel better. The root cause, a combination of lifestyle, environment, and over-medication, rarely receives attention. The focus stayed firmly on the next bottle, the next pill, the next quick fix. Pharmacies and manufacturers quietly benefited from this pattern. Repeat customers were the backbone of their business. Each new prescription or purchase kept the tills ringing. The advertisements did not need to mention the possibility of side effects. They only had to promise relief from whatever ailment was currently troubling the customer. As soon as that ailment faded and another appeared, the customer returned. In homes across the city, the family medicine shelf began to look like a history of this loop. Bottles with half-faded labels stood next to tins with missing lids, each one the remnant of a different attempt at a cure. Some were nearly empty, others still mostly full because they had lost favour before they were finished. Yet none were thrown away. There was always the chance they might be needed again. People told themselves that the key was simply to find the right medicine. If one brand of cough syrup caused headaches, they would try another. If a tonic for digestion led to sleeplessness, they would replace it with a new formula. This trial-and-error approach was not seen as wasteful, but as necessary. If this way of thinking existed today, it would be like changing phone apps every week and insisting the problem is always the software, never the user's habits. For some, the cycle became part of their identity. They were known among friends or neighbours for always having the latest remedy to recommend. These amateur advisors meant well, but they were also passing along their part in the loop. A medicine that had helped them for a week before causing trouble might be eagerly suggested to someone else, starting the process all over again. Doctors of the time often contributed to this cycle, knowingly or not. Without the benefit of modern diagnostic tools, they prescribed based on symptoms rather than causes. If a patient returned with new complaints, another prescription followed. The idea of stepping back and reducing medicine use was far less common than simply adjusting the treatment. After all, a doctor was expected to give something tangible in return for the consultation. The effect on households could be subtle but lasting. Money that might have been saved or spent on better food, warmer clothing, or home improvements often went toward another purchase at the pharmacy. This quiet diversion of resources was rarely discussed. Health was priceless, and the hope of relief outweighed questions about cost. Over time, the loop became invisible. People no longer thought of it as a loop at all. It was just the way life was, one ailment followed another, each one treated as best as possible. The idea that the treatments themselves might be contributing to the chain of events was uncomfortable, so it was avoided. It was easier to believe in the next cure than to question the last. From the perspective of the pharmaceutical trade, this arrangement was perfect. Customers were loyal without realizing it. They returned willingly, even gratefully, for products that solved one problem while quietly sowing the seeds of the next. There was no need for manipulation beyond the simple cycle of cause and effect. The emotional side of this pattern was just as strong as the physical. A person who had been unwell and then felt better, even briefly, formed a connection to the medicine that seemed to help. That memory of improvement was powerful enough to outweigh the discomfort that followed. In the mind, the good moments shone brighter than the bad, and so, when the discomfort faded a little, they were ready to try again. Looking back, it is hard not to see the waste, the missed opportunities for real healing, and the quiet damage done by constant reliance on chemical solutions. I often think that what people wanted was not a cure, but the reassurance that they were doing something to fight whatever was troubling them. That reassurance was enough to keep the cycle spinning, year after year. The Victorian age was a time of remarkable progress in many areas: science, engineering, and communication. But it was also a time when personal health was a delicate balance between tradition, new inventions, and marketing. The cycle of dependence on medicines, old and new, was not just a medical issue but a cultural one. It spoke to the optimism of the era, the belief that every problem could be fixed if only the right tool or substance could be found. As the years went on, some began to question the wisdom of this endless chain. Public health campaigns slowly emerged, warning about certain drugs and their risks. Regulations tightened, but for decades, the loop had already done its work, shaping habits and expectations in ways that lasted well into the future. In the end, the cycle was less about the medicines themselves and more about the human need for control, comfort, and hope. Those needs do not change with time. They only find new forms. The Victorian shelves may be gone, but the impulse to reach for a quick solution remains very much alive. Thank you for staying through the quiet unraveling of this world. I hope that as you set these images aside, your thoughts can slow, your breath can deepen, and your mind can rest. May the noise of the day fade, replaced by the calm of knowing the story is complete. Sleep well, and good